What did your family do that you later realized was completely unhinged? When my mother left my dad, she pitched a tent in my walk-in closet. I was 7 or 8 and she lived in my fricking closet for months before she got her own place. I still remember her reading her Joyce Meyer books by lamplight. She couldn't stand to sleep in the same bed with him, but couldn't afford to leave, so she'd rather live in a closet. Damn. They kept everything. Everything. The moment I walked into my friend's house and realized you're not supposed to have stuff lining the walls was ridiculous. They let homeless punk rockers live with us, several of them, and some of them slept in our beds with us, with her permission. My mum was always very interested in our romantic lives, partly because that was an area where we didn't stack up as well compared to our cousins. The most insane manifestation of this was when I agreed to go out on a date with a guy, only to find out before the date that he was a predator who had been fired or arrested after he made moves on 4 separate freshmen at the school where he taught. My mum flipped out, trying to convince me not to cancel the date. He might have grown out of it, you don't know if you don't give him a chance. Thankfully, my dad was on my side and I cancelled the date. My mum sulked the rest of the night and demanded I log her into my Facebook account so she could scroll through my friend list so that she could see which of my male friends were straight and single so she could push me towards them instead. I now have my own place and peace and solitude and no preverts in my life. I had no restrictions on food or drinks, and from the time I was 4 or 5, I was drinking around 5 cans of Dr. Pepper a day. My parents never told me I needed to drink water, and real juice was never in the house. Juice, when I was little, was Hawaiian Punch or the 5% Juice Minute Maid fruit punch. Lunches during the summer was a continuous cycle of pizza rolls, SpaghettiOs, and McDonald's. Breakfast was either chocolate Pop-Tarts or Fruity Pebbles cereal. Now, I don't think junk food now and then is too much, but I don't think I had a single day in my childhood where I wasn't given sweets, fatty snacks, or caffeine. The funny thing is, as a kid, I used to think it was my friends' parents who were the odd, mean ones for only letting their kids have things like sodas on rare occasions. Looking back, I speculate that along with just being lazy, it was also probably my parents' way of trying to make me happy and make up for the lack of time spent with me by buying me whatever junk food I wanted. Yeah, I mean, it's good to acknowledge that this bad parenting still likely came from a place of love, but you still owe it to your kids to set them up for success and later life in all things, including their diet. It's so important for their senses of boundaries and their attention span at school, to say nothing of their damn health. At least it seems like you got out okay on the other end. I don't have very many memories of my childhood, or really anything in the last 25 years. But I do remember when we'd go in time out, we'd have to bend our knees and fold our arms behind our backs while staring at the wall. We had to stand motionless and silent for 30 minutes. If we moved or swayed, we got another 30 minutes. This would go on for hours sometimes. My brothers and I would pull muscles and pass out at times. Also, while we were in the shower, our parents would search our rooms. They did this every day, and if they found anything they didn't like, they'd make us jump out of the shower, still dripping wet and undressed, and come clean or explain whatever they found. And we were always grounded, but they would never tell us why. So since we were already grounded, they'd just take away our birthdays or do time out for punishment. I've only celebrated my birthday twice in my life, and both times my mum shut it down within 10 minutes. In short, leg day all day. I can do squats for hours. Alright, I'll answer some of the questions that are coming up. To those who don't believe, that's fine. I don't need you to believe me. I know what I went through and I don't need to prove it to anyone. My birthday is March 30th. I'm a 25-year-old woman. I live in Omaha, Nebraska in the United States with my boyfriend and 6 cats. Not with my parents. They kicked me out a week before my 18th birthday. My family is mixed race, but predominantly white. My mum claims to be Wiccan and Christian at the same time. My father is a Mormon. Kind of. He's crystal addicted and schizophrenic and a vagrant that used to be Mormon. The values I brought up under are mostly Mormon. My parents divorced and both remarried. They both admitted that they should never have had kids, and myself and siblings all agree. My mother is a narcissist who always needs to be the center of attention. She managed to make my grandfather's death all about her. And I just found out my grandmother is going into hospice care this weekend. My mother never even once mentioned that she was sick, and she's a POA. I've been able to cope with everything by disassociating and repressing. Also, I just joke about the crap that happened to me. It really helps me work through it. I'll say something that was traumatic with a huge smile on my face and then just do finger guns and walk away. It's really cathartic. I have one coworker who I think gets it and he just does it right back like it's no big deal. He jokes that I must be cursed and that my life is the perfect example of Murphy's Law. I have new memories pop up all the time. Sometimes random things bring them up. I actually had one pop up this morning. I smelled Dial Gold hand soap. I've always hated the smell of it and it makes me gag. A memory popped into my head of being held down and having soap pumped into my mouth. That was another one of my mum's genius punishments. I ended up hurling up and then was punished for that with the bent knee timeout. I mean, I think I'm okay? I don't really know. I've always had a lot of anxiety, yet I'm essentially devoid of emotion. I guess I'm 97% okay and 3% very not okay. I don't know. My grandpa would pick up my mum and aunt from elementary school and race the train every time. My mum was scared shirtless and my aunt was cheering him on to go faster. My mum once blew out the pilot lights on our gas stove, cranked up the gas, and told 7-year-old me and my 14-year-old sister just to go to sleep. I went to bed not knowing any better. Luckily, my sister dragged me out of the house and we sat in the car. My mum finally changed her mind and sobered up a bit and aired out the house, relit the pilots, and took us back inside. So, that was fun. My brother, while raising his boys, would buy like 10 gallons of milk at a time while it was on sale and then put it in the deep freezer. It never tasted like milk after it thawed. He claimed to not have noticed a difference. Oh, there's a difference, all right. I was a kid and I had no idea that this gross taste would be eliminated or rectified, I guess, by shaking the milk. Man, I bet my nephews wish they could have known that. We live on a farm in the middle of nowhere, at least 35 minutes to the nearest grocery store. I'm not sure how it started because I was a kid, but anytime our puppy dog howled, we'd all howl, to the point that it was a deafening sound and would make our ears rattle a bit. His name was Duke. I'd occasionally howl first because then he'd follow, and then so would my mother, father, and 2 older brothers. I thought it was awesome and fun, and it felt invigorating to do. I now realize this is slightly unusual behavior. My godbrother's parents used to lock us in his room for hours to days at a time. His little brothers learned to pee in the trash can instead of on the floor when we couldn't get them out. We eventually learned how to unlock and relock the hatch from inside the room so that the 4 of us could get out for pee breaks and for snacks when we were feeling really courageous. I didn't realize how abnormal this was until I was watching a news story in the work break room with a bunch of coworkers about a neglected child being removed from an unfit home. My initial response was, that's nothing. As I launched into what I just wrote above, I looked around waiting for everyone else's stories, but instead they all just stared at me. Quite a few people have been very kind and offered sound advice to me. Therapy is definitely worth its weight in gold. I have a brother with disabilities. He's relatively low-functioning and requires regular attention, both inside the home and out. I love him to death, but it made for a pretty untraditional childhood. I didn't realize until my late teenage years that other families were happy and relaxed, which isn't to say they didn't have their problems, just that they weren't constantly preoccupied by one family member who requires more care and attention than the others, at all times. And to be clear, my brother is a wonderful person. I cherish every moment that I get to spend with him now, but at the same time, I spend a disproportionate amount of my childhood in waiting rooms while he went to various therapies. I spent very little time with my parents growing up because of all their attention being focused on my brother. I was an afterthought because I was lucky enough to be an afterthought and still function. My parents visited underground Atlanta back in the early 90s. Not the safest place. Anyways, my brother was a baby and crawled under a bench they were sitting on. He pulled out an umbrella bag with a very sinister knife inside. My parents don't report the knife or anything, but instead keep it and it becomes a staple knife in our kitchen. So, yeah, pretty sure my parents used a murder weapon to cut the crust off our PB&J. I wonder if there are important fingerprints on that umbrella bag to this day. I wouldn't be surprised if your parents had kept that as well, so you never know. The knife has probably been through the dishwasher a couple of times by now, sadly. My alcoholic, bipolar father would drop me and my 2 siblings off at the grocery store with his credit card and tell us to go grocery shopping. We were young kids when this started. He'd either go and hit up a bar or wait in the parking lot before coming back to get us. Sometimes it would be a very long wait. Looking back, I still don't know how we were able to run his credit card and nobody ever batted an eye. We had to cook too, so it wasn't exactly healthy stuff. A lot of the times, the food would all be gone a week or so before he'd take us back to the store. So we had to get really creative. We'd joke that there was nothing left but the goo in the back of the refrigerator. Honestly, I'm surprised we didn't develop diabetes, although I am hypoglycemic, or obesity or anything serious. We quickly learned not to buy a bunch of candy or sweets, something that kind of impresses me looking back. I learned to keep an emergency stash of food hidden in my room. One of many insane things, but that's the first that comes to mind. When I was in 6th grade, I think, my mum decided we needed to understand what it was like for people in third world countries. We ate oatmeal for breakfast, beans and rice for lunch, we could have one fruit for a snack, and beans and rice plus some romaine lettuce for dinner. All of this for a month, and we were only allowed 3 cheat meals. In high school, looking back, I just thought she was bat crap crazy. But once I started having bills and such of my own, it occurred to me my parents were just that broke. They just didn't want us to realize and worry. Damn, do I love those two people. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. On the day my dad decided to buy our family's first PC, he loaded me and my younger sisters into the back of our little 2-door Honda and drove the 20 minutes to the store. After purchasing the computer, my dad realized there wasn't enough room in our tiny car for 3 children, car seats, and a giant 1997 computer. So he left us at the store, apparently thinking that if he bought us all candy bars, that would be enough to keep a 5-year-old, 3-year-old, and 2-year-old occupied and out of trouble. He took the new computer home and then turned around to come back and get us, having left us alone for easily 40 minutes. My mum found out about all of this a year ago when my dad casually told the story over dinner. My dad once took 3 of us kids out for a ride in the Pine Barrens. He drove us 20 minutes into the woods on a sandy trail in a minivan. He had just gotten into a fight with my stepmother and needed a drive to burn off all the alcohol in his system. He didn't say much during the ride. We got stuck, obviously because we were in a 2-wheel drive camper van, but luckily some 4-wheel drive truck dude came through and winched us out. When that guy showed up, my dad wasn't quiet anymore, and we left the woods when we were unstuck and we went home. I'm not sure what his intentions were that day, but the look on my stepmother's face when we returned made me rethink whether it was a fun ride in the woods or a screw-this-life moment worthy of the nightly news, narrowly averted. To answer a few questions, my dad's been dead for 7 years, so we don't really talk much anymore. It wasn't unusual for him to go out for a ride after a drunken fight, but it was the only time he took some of his kids with him. I'm guessing that's what made my stepmother so upset. As a young kid with a drunk for a dad, I never really thought about him purposefully ending us. He was an angry drunk, but it was mostly just verbal. At that point, I'd never been off-roading in the woods, so I was more focused on the scenery than the purpose or possible outcome of the ride. Like a lot of things from childhood, I didn't realize some of the severities of the situation until I was much older. My mother is very controlling. She would make me turn my diary over to make sure I wasn't writing anything that she didn't approve of. So I saved up enough money by skipping school lunch and bought a secret diary at the book fair. I came home to her sitting on my bed and yelling at me for writing "Mum is a jerk" or something like that. She would have grounded me, but I wasn't allowed out of the house without her escorting me until the age of 16 anyway. She then wondered why I had no friends. I was only allowed 30 minutes on the computer in the computer room, and I'd have to record which websites I went on and what usernames and passwords I used. She'd use the password book to go on the websites and look at who I was talking to. I also just kind of accepted that it was normal for parents to charge rent when you turn 18 and only allow you to eat 1 meal a day, dinner, and to have to pay for the others yourself. The rent thing doesn't bother me as much. It started out as $500 a month and went up every year, so now I'm at $700 a month. That's pretty normal rent around where I live, and I don't have to pay for heat or internet or stuff. I'm trying to move out, but I also have to pay for college out of pocket, and it all adds up. My folks got into a screaming argument where they ended up throwing dishes at each other's heads, fairly frequently. Oh wow, they're really mad right now. Better play some Nintendo until this blows over. You know, it wasn't until later in life that my sister and I said, "Wait a second, what the frick?" When we were young, my father smoked a lot, and when we were with him during the day and said we were hungry, he'd give us each a packet of matches. We'd eat them and then be good. No, we weren't poor, we just had lazy and crazy parents. I used to babysit my parents' friends' kids occasionally. After I babysat 2 kids that were 4 and 6, my mum said her friend was happy and I did a good job. I was 13. Then she mentioned that that was good because her friend was distrustful of babysitters since her other 2 kids had drowned while under a babysitter's supervision. I thought that was slightly odd. No helicoptering in the 80s. Oh, fend for yourself night. When I was like 5 and onwards, we'd have to find our own food that night. I later found out my parents were too lazy to cook for my sister and I, who were only 5 and 8. I used to come up with really weird food combinations, most notably Nutella or peanut butter and candy sprinkles wrapped up in a tortilla. As I got older, I began toasting it and rolling it in cinnamon sugar. And wow, people are either going, "Same, dude," or "My God, how could a parent do something like this to a 5-year-old?" I feel a little better knowing that there's more of us. And to clarify, this happening once a week or something isn't really an issue. With me, it gradually went from like twice a week to every other day. Eventually, growing up, my parents just stopped cooking, and if they did, it was suddenly a huge deal. Like they'd cook once a week at the most. Really chaotic stuff. I became the best improv chef ever, so I'm thankful. But at the same time, Jesus Christ, I mean, my sister became a pre-diabetic at age 12 over the lack of nutrition. We didn't know any better, unfortunately. One of the winter chores was to clear old trees in an area that eventually became fields. Now imagine, if you will, being hoisted up to a knot on top of a tree, 30 feet in the air, on the front-end loader of a tractor so that you could dump in a mixture of oil and gas, and chucking a match in the hole. The explosion being enough to rock the loader back and forth, my father ran the tractor while I firebombed the tree. When those trees did come down, we'd haul them off with the tractor while chained up. I'd ride in the outer branches to where we were hauling these old-growth cottonwood trees that were massive and sometimes tipped. More than once I got caught up under these trees as they rolled, but luckily I never got more than a few scrapes. Well, yes, this is child endangerment, but the more I think about certain other farm jobs, this sounds a lot less dangerous than being one of those kids who rides around everywhere on a quad bike or ATV, which happened a lot on the farms I grew up next to. And that aside, I think at least the first few times doing this as a kid would be the coolest thing in the world. All of my friends would be hearing about this. My mother sends her professional emails in Comic Sans. My mother refused to take me to the emergency room growing up. She took my stepdad and my stepsister, but refused to take me. I've got permanent damage to my ankle thanks to her refusing to take me there. Thanks, Mum. I live in the UK for reference, so it wasn't like we couldn't afford it. Throughout my childhood, I'd end up being my dad's therapist. He'd often tell me he sometimes wished he could go to sleep and never wake up. That's a bit heavy for a 12-year-old to hear from their parent. After I became a teen and could drive, he'd call me in the middle of the night while I was at my mum's house and ask me to rush over because he was sick and needed help. I spent a lot of nights feeding him Jell-O and sitting awake in his room so he could sleep because his meds would make him hallucinate and he'd think demons were going to kill him in his sleep. It wasn't until I was older that I realized I missed a lot of my childhood because I had to parent him instead of the other way round. Eventually, he found a wife who took care of him and cut me out of his life. Apparently, he tells her stories about how I never spend time with him and has never cared because she sends me rants about how awful I am. Mine's pretty simple. We didn't have money for food when I was a kid. My mum was too embarrassed to apply for food stamps, so we just went without. But my parents had no issues buying food only for themselves and refusing to let us have any, including hiding them on high shelves so we couldn't sneak into it. They'd eat in front of my sister and I while we sat and glared. They'd get mad and give us each a bite and then make us go to our rooms. There would be nothing else in the house to eat and it didn't matter. As a kid, it sucked, but your parents know what they're doing, right? As an adult and a parent myself, it's batcrap crazy now. I could never sit there and eat while my son went hungry. It came out later that my mum was an addict, narcotics and booze, and my dad was more interested in doing it with any girl who'd have him than raising the consequences of doing that. So yeah, they aren't a part of my life anymore. My in-laws, well, mostly my now-deceased mother-in-law and a brother-in-law, swear by trunk food. What is trunk food? It is food that you make and sometimes cook, sometimes not, and when you go on a road trip, you wrap it in foil and throw it in the truck with the spare tire and everything else gross back there. This is only done for long-distance trips. When you arrive at your destination, you eat the food. Mother-in-law and brother-in-law swore that it made the food taste better. If the food was uncooked, the idea was that being in a hot trunk for several hours would cook it to the desired temperature. In theory, the cakes were probably the safest. She'd make small individual spice cake loaves and wrap them up, and then you would have spice cake with the gentle aroma of car exhaust. She once made an entire birthday cake for me in the same way, except that it was left in the pan and had icing, and minimal wrapping. I ate a slice to be polite, but I was being very polite. I didn't eat the rest. My brother-in-law is the worst, though. He is Orthodox Jewish and keeps kosher, which is very problematic when traveling long distances, so he's used to having to pack food with him. They used to live in South Carolina, and he was driving to Miami to catch a flight to Israel a few times before he actually emigrated there. We live in Central Florida and offered to prepare him some kosher food, but he wasn't having any of that, and he bought his own meatloaf out of the trunk of a very hot car on a hot summer day. He wanted to share it with us, but I have this thing about food poisoning, so I didn't eat it. You can only be so polite. Mother-in-law has passed away, and the brother-in-law now lives in Israel, so no more trunk food in my life. My husband, the twin of the brother-in-law, has working brain cells and believes strongly in food safety. Thank goodness. What happened that destroyed a wedding without warning? Well, I wasn't born at the time, but my parents rented the observation deck on the Hancock Building in Boston for their reception. Tallest building in the city, beautiful view. My dad pored over historic weather charts to figure out what day was statistically most likely to be nice out. Day of the wedding comes, and of course, thick fog unlike anything they'd ever seen before. Couldn't see a thing out of the windows of the room they'd picked specifically for the view. It worked out well, though. They were happily married for nearly 30 years before illness took my dad a few years ago. There's one other funny anecdote to that wedding, though. The wedding was held in King's Chapel, which is an incredibly historic church in downtown Boston that's something of a major tourist attraction. Turns out it wasn't even that expensive to close it for one afternoon for a wedding. The tourists waiting outside the church didn't know that, though, and someone started the rumor that my parents were incredibly wealthy, maybe even Kennedys. As a result, there were tons of people taking photos of them when they left the ceremony. Not sure if any of them ever figured out that my parents most certainly were not rich or famous. When I was 6 or 7, I went to a cousin's wedding. Everything was fabulous for little old me, so much sugar everywhere, basically heaven. The reception was in a big community center that was reserved for the occasion. Went to the girls' bathroom, passing by the men's room to see my uncle on the dance floor. Went back to the main room to tell my dad my uncle was looking weird. Well, turns out uncle had had a stroke and died. The bride spent the rest of the afternoon crying, and everyone except close family left. Bright side is the marriage is still going strong 20 years later, despite what happened that day. Leading up to my friend's wedding, his father had been battling cancer after a terminal diagnosis, and it was touch and go whether he'd be well enough to attend the wedding. In the end, he was too unwell to attend, despite wishing that he could. Just as we got to the reception, my friend was informed that his father had just passed away. It was devastating. I played a wedding where, as we started playing the set, everyone ran outside and nobody was anywhere to be seen for the rest of the night. I originally assumed it was just because nobody liked the band, us. But the bride came in afterwards and said there was a huge fight involving multiple members of both families and everyone basically went home upset, injured, or in a police van. We couldn't stop playing since we were paid and it was our job, and the only person watching was the drunk uncle dancing on his own, asking for requests that we didn't know. The drunk uncle dancing by himself all night sounds like something that would happen at a Sims wedding. It does indeed sound like something from The Sims, but as an old-hand hospitality worker, let me tell you that this is one of those points where The Sims is eerily realistic. At the end of any given party, there's always one guy on the dance floor. My dad and stepmom's wedding was a crap show. For context, her family was terrible on both sides. She had an angry, violent father, neglectful alcoholic mother, and step-parents who didn't care about her much. She basically ran to my father to get away from it all when she was 15. Bigger problem was, my dad was 26, also a violent bully, and just a real frickin' crap show of a person. On my father's side of things, he hated his mother and blamed everything wrong in his life on her, as he did to most women in his family, later doing it to the same stepmom we're talking about. So the wedding was doomed to just be awful. It started when my stepmom was just walking down the aisle. She'd reconnected with her father in the last year and had recently been in a fight with her stepfather, so it was just her dad walking her. There was a branch in the way, it was an outdoor wedding, but he pulled it out of the way for her. As she thanks him, he lets go and flings it back into her face and collapses laughing. She awkwardly chuckles, no doubt knowing he's going to get mad at her if she shows she's upset, and the day continues, but she's visibly upset after. After the toasts, some people didn't drink the champagne that had been set out. The one thing she had asked of her mum was that she not drink. Her mum was even given sparkling juice rather than champagne. So while stepmom is changing into her reception dress, her mum goes table to table pounding down all the alcohol she can get her hands on. A cousin of mine who doesn't know what's happening starts chanting, "Chug, chug, chug, chug." And then my poor stepmom walks back into the room to see her mother downing the last drink and then denying she had done it. My cousin slips out of the tent once he realizes what's going on and leaves the two alone to argue. Stepmom comes out crying a few minutes later, goes back to her car and doesn't come back for a good 20 minutes. While all of that's happening, Grandma pulls up and starts cursing out my dad for a ton of crap, including marrying a kid who she hates. And by the way, my stepmom was only a year younger than my dad at the time. Then complaining about people not letting her invite a friend to the wedding, and then Dad owing Grandma a bunch of money. Dad tells her to F off and she leaves. Then my dad got mad at my stepmom for being gone so long, accused her of either being a baby for crying or lying and cheating on him. So she sat down on the fringes and tried not to cry and also remain visible to my dad for the next several hours. They might have been dating for 10 years, but the marriage only lasted 6 months. I've catered many weddings, and there have been some memorable ones, I can tell you. Fights between guests, wedding cakes falling over, red wine spilt on wedding dresses, the lot. The one I'll never forget, it was an all-day do with a small ceremony, a few close friends and family, with a big reception filled with a huge buffet, every kind of food you could imagine, and free bar. All in the same venue. They'd booked and paid for 250 evening guests, but 30 guests turned up at most. My heart broke for this couple. A massive, beautiful converted barn, loads of food and drink, great music, but no guests. At about 10 p.m., the venue was licensed until 11, the buffet food had barely been touched, the few people who were there ate, but it hardly made a dent as it was planned for so many more people. I asked the mother of the bride if she wanted me to cover and refrigerate the untouched food so the new couple could take it home, and her response of, "Oh no, there are still a lot of people coming," was the most awkward I've ever felt in my life. No more guests showed up. There was a flash of car headlights in the distance at about 10:30, and the bride beamed when she thought it was latecomers arriving. But no, it was just the taxis arriving to pick up the few who were there. It's the only event I've ever done where we didn't have to kick people out of the venue. At 11 p.m., the place was empty. In a nutshell, bride's parents paid for the day, and the happy couple had zero control over their guests list. Her parents had invited all of their friends to the evening function, but in reality, it was just associates they wanted to flex on, resulting in no one giving a crap about an invite to a wedding where they didn't know the bride or groom. It was basically just a networking event for the bride's parents. I used to do catering work, and this one time my boss sent me to a remote location in the woods that was a beautiful river. I found out while we were loading the truck that the boss wouldn't be going and that I was essentially in charge. My boss promised that everything was taken care of and set up, so you can imagine my surprise when I arrived to this remote location and literally nothing was set up. We were only about an hour early, so I frantically started trying to get the tent in order. We needed extension cords to run the coffee and tea, and there were none. We needed tables to set up the food, and there were none of those either. I somehow whipped up an impromptu everything for the missing things, just as the bride and groom were arriving. We blew the fuse for our only power source, and the place was plunged into darkness. We reset the breaker, I moved some stuff around, and blew the fuse again. This delicate dance went on for the entire evening, through speeches, the first dance, the works. I think the worst part of the entire experience was when we went to rinse our dishes before boxing them up and found out that when we blew the fuses, the water pump for the place stopped working and needed to be primed again. At that point I said, forget about it, we'll take them back dirty, and the crew and I spent several more hours after the long ride home doing the dishes. That was the day I worked a 15-hour shift without a break and still ruined the wedding. Needless to say, I quit that job. The mother of the groom was an alcoholic for many years. She decided to quit drinking cold turkey a few days before the wedding. During the reception, she had a seizure and was taken to the hospital via ambulance. My God, a great resolution and gesture gone horribly wrong. That sucks for everyone. Maybe get specialist advice before you make a radical lifestyle change like this, folks? Although I can't point the finger, I wouldn't have guessed that that would happen. I was best man at my sister-in-law's wedding. I'd stepped in for the brother of the groom. That's another story entirely. For a whole year of planning, all the bride, my sister-in-law, wanted was a dove release when they said handwritten vows to each other. Very small, non-denominational wedding. Most of the family were atheists. Day arrives, it was early summer, and something was off with the bird handlers. They showed up a bit late and were sourcing help from the wedding party to get everything in line. When the time comes to say their vows, I help the handler carry the chest with the doves in it over to what is to be the altar where the bride and the groom are standing. The vows are just about wrapping up and the handler gives me the signal to open the chest. I open it and see 20 to 30 dead doves in the crate. I immediately close it to try and limit who knows what happened, but too late. The look of horror on the bride's face was all that I needed. We spent the next few hours trying to cheer everyone up, but by the end of the reception, the entire wedding party had organized and filed animal cruelty complaints on the handler. It was all anyone could focus on. The wedding was at a state park that's famous for its giant gorge and waterfall. I don't know whose idea this was, but someone suggested a photo overlooking this gorge and everyone was game. The wedding party went around a stone security barrier and the maid of honor literally fell off the cliff to her death. It was like 500 feet. I attended a wedding reception and was seated near the cameraman. An aunt of mine was sitting closer to the camera and spent the evening commenting and gossiping about everyone, and much of it came out on the video. The cameraman was great. He did 2 copies, one edited and the other no holds barred. The unedited version is the stuff of legend. Release the Ant Snyder cut, or actually the Snide Ant cut. Nobody turned up to the reception except myself and my partner. There were about 8 people there in total, and the couple had gone all out for it. It was so awkward. I was a guest of a friend of the bride. I didn't know anyone attending. Very expensive, over-the-top place, several hundred guests in this very Italian wedding. The maid of honor grabbed the mic at the cocktail hour, began her speech, rambling and drunk, quickly devolved into stating the recently deceased mother of the bride was against this wedding and that that's basically what had killed her. Plus, Vinny will never give up his working girl habit. She was finally tackled by several people and dragged away. The happy couple is separated and divorced within a year. Mamma mia. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. The bride's father was 45 minutes late to walk his daughter down the aisle. While we were waiting, the air conditioning broke in the venue. It was over 100 degrees outside and humid as frick. The place was overcrowded, you could barely move without bumping into someone else, and the heat was extra miserable. I guess the air conditioning problem had also affected the refrigeration or something because most of the food was spoiled. The only food on the buffet was salad, spaghetti, and rolls. Not enough to even feed half the guests. Most people left after the first dance, and 2 of the bride's aunts fainted. The bride and the wedding planner were crying. When the wedding planner is crying, you know the day has spiraled out of control. I feel bad for laughing, but man, that's so true. I'd say that's a rare occasion for a wedding planner. The groom got so drunk the night before he couldn't make it to the altar at the ceremony. They still had the ceremony with only the bride and her party, plus the one groomsman who apparently didn't get wasted. Everyone was shaking their heads the entire time. The groom did make a singular appearance for a few seconds at the reception. He looked like a zombie and was wearing street clothes. And this was no trashy wedding, by the way. The bride was a professional dancer for a major label pop star, so that gives you the idea of the kinds of people that were in attendance. 200 plus people at the ceremony alone, probably double that at the reception. They divorced within 6 months. The father of the bride died suddenly 3 days before the wedding, pre-COVID. Daddy-daughter dance was mum, bride, and picture of dad. Same with walking down the aisle to give her away. Lots of tears, not many smiles. Even the bartender at the hotel knew the night before and was talking about it with me. It was a big wedding, over 300 people. Turns out the bride had been having an affair with her cousin's husband. The cousin had known for a little bit, but waited until the wedding to go table to table, letting everyone know the bride was sleeping with her husband. Poor groom was blindsided. Worst part was his father-in-law was well off and opened up a restaurant for him. Well, he lost his wife and the restaurant. You know, the narrator was expecting a lot more of the stories in question to be about affairs. Nope, we've mostly just had a lot of honest-to-God unavoidable tragedies, some real act-of-God type things, or just horrible people in general. So thank you for this last story. We needed more scarcely believable infidelity to make this all a bit more surreal for us. But yes, it does have to be said that this sucks for the groom. Best friend's mom got remarried and had an expensive, beautiful wedding, but for some reason didn't hire a DJ. At the last minute, her mum asked me to manage the CD and gave me a list along with verbal instructions of when to play each thing. I tried to warn her that I simply didn't follow, but she told me she had confidence in me. Apparently, all her life she had wanted to walk down the aisle to some specific song, but I just couldn't figure it out. They had to get walking to match the sunset, so she went ahead down the aisle while I flipped through a series of incorrect songs to the horror and amusement of the crowd. Years afterwards, when I called my friend's house and her stepdad answered, he'd say, "Oh, is this the guy who screwed up my wedding? How are you?" I work at a golf course with a lot of history behind it. We do wedding venues inside the clubhouse, and the actual ceremony is held outside by the historic water fountain and a large pond. The first problem was the weather. I live in a high desert and it's very warm. A solid 90 degrees that day, and it was also pretty windy. So everyone was outside, no umbrellas and no ease-ups. The next problem, and probably the worst, was the golf cart incident. The bride and groom wanted to ride into the sunset on one of our golf carts. Drive around a little bit on the course. To be fair, it's beautiful on the course during sunset. However, the cart had somehow gotten a nail in the tire went flat, the battery on the cart went crazy, and the cart ended up freaking out. It came to a complete stop from 15 miles per hour to 0. The wheels and mechanism locked up, almost seizing. Both the bride and groom, fairly overweight mind you, went over the windscreen and rolled over a few times. They were totally okay, just a few bruises, including the ones on their egos. So retrieving the cart wasn't fun. And last but not least, the power inside the clubhouse went out due to high winds. There was no after-party available. After the cake was cut, hardly any food was given out. Yeah, not a great day to cover for someone on your day off. This was one I worked at. After the ceremony, right at the start of the reception, the photographer was taking jumping photos of the bride and bridesmaids, so they were all jumping in the air while wearing heels. You know where this is going. The bride landed and dislocated her knee, then passed out and kept going in and out of consciousness. We called an ambulance who turned up and fixed her knee, but she wanted to continue with the wedding. She then had the first course of the meal and then threw up down her dress and had to sit with her mum in another room while everyone else danced. I felt so bad for her as she spent the rest of the evening crying. I went to a wedding where the bride and groom brought the wedding package on Groupon, which is fine. Why spend a fortune on one day? But I guess the venue thought they could cut some corners too. So they stuck us in a room that smelled so strongly of cat pee that some people immediately left. The only drinks were those from a vending machine. It was next to an airport, so every time a plane took off, the ceremony had to be paused because you couldn't hear anything. And the day after the event, every single one of us had food poisoning. And a bonus story, because even though it didn't ruin the wedding for the couple, it ruined it for the bridal party. I was a bridesmaid for my other friend. I flew across the world for over 10 hours to be there. I had to do the setup of the venue, assign people to rooms, put signs on doors, finish the seating chart, transport food, redo her bouquet because she didn't like it. A long, long list. The whole time she was rude and telling everyone within earshot that the bridesmaids just aren't helping me. Her maid of honor was absolutely bending over backwards to keep her happy, and instead of being grateful, she instead told her sister, "I should have asked you to be my maid of honor instead." She was pretty cold to me and kept asking if I'd lost weight. I said yes because I'd been ill, but I didn't think much of it. At the reception, her new husband took the opportunity to read the speech she clearly wrote for him to say to me, "We're so glad you fit into your dress," in front of over 100 people. I don't speak to her anymore, and neither does her maid of honor or any of her other bridesmaids. We attended a wedding for family members who didn't have a lot of money. It was hosted at an inexpensive venue, but it was nice. My heart broke when only a third of the people invited showed up. You could see the hurt in the couple's face. They came up to our table and said, "Do you have any friends in the city we lived in an hour away?" They had all this food for 100 people, but only 30 guests. They were willing to have complete strangers come down just so their money and food wouldn't go to waste. We hadn't handed over our card with cash inside yet, so my husband hit the ATM and added another $100. Maybe not ruined, but it definitely got tense. Started with the best man and groom's brother just absolutely roasting the bride and her parents. Basically called them gold diggers and stuff in front of several hundred family and friends. Then they cut the cake. Apparently the groom was told under no uncertain terms not to shove the cake in her face. Well, he did it anyway and she stormed off, not to be seen for 20 minutes. The reception went on as planned, she got wasted, and I'm told she passed out that night in the middle of the street while still in her wedding dress. Pure class. They're divorced now. This is the tale of my elder cousin. He attended a wedding where the bride and groom got scammed by the wedding organizer. 1 hour before the wedding event, there was nothing in the room. No food, no decorations, just a few tables, and basically it felt like an unused ballroom. The bride and groom realized the wedding organizer scammed them, and the wedding organizer took the money to buy themselves a big old house. When the bride and groom decided to see the wedding organizer, they caught him sleeping in his house. It became national TV news here, and the wedding organizer got sued by a few brides and grooms that got scammed by them too. Well, at least this had something of a wider spread happy ending. People who take advantage of an event like this and then run away and leave the bride and groom who've likely blown their entire savings are just absolute monsters. I was invited to the reception of one of my good friends. They'd been courthouse married for months and living happily. When I arrived at the location and saw the big crowd, I knew something was wrong. My friend's wife is prone to panic attacks and is extremely agoraphobic to the point of breaking down and crying if she's overwhelmed. I immediately called my friend and asked what's going on and if this was okay. Turns out my friend's parents invited everyone possible to be there without my friend knowing. After I sent him a picture of the crowd, he and his wife thought it would be better to go on a second honeymoon than have a reception. He sent a message apologizing to all those he and his wife had invited and told them to leave without telling his parents. They, of course, had a meltdown as we left. This was around 2009. On the second day of the wedding, the bride went swimming in the ocean. It took place in Tenerife. She swam out too far and was basically lost at sea for 9 hours or so. She eventually found her way back but was in bad shape. Everyone was panicked the whole day and thought she drowned. By the time she got back, she wished she had. Her husband found her phone and read a bunch of messages supposedly from her aunt, but it was very clear from the racy content that it wasn't her aunt at all. She had been having an affair with the best man for apparently years. They got an annulment shortly after, $60,000 down the drain, one of the most opulent weddings I've ever been to. A fight broke out between the father of the bride, brother of the bride, and some guy that just happened to be staying at the hotel. In reality, I don't know how much of a fight it was, more just the dad and brother beating up some guy. So anyway, they were both arrested. Cut to the bride sobbing at breakfast because her dad and brother spent the evening of her wedding in jail and now faced charges for what they did to this poor man. Hurricane Ivan. Our wedding was scheduled for Friday and the hurricane hit us dead center on Thursday. We were sitting around with no power on Friday and remembered that a neighbor was a pastor. So my partner and I just knocked on his front door and asked if he'd just marry us in the front yard. So the big church wedding was cancelled, but instead I got married in the front yard with chainsaws and stuff in the background. Been married for 17 years now. The groom's father got handsy with both the bride and his daughter, my then girlfriend, multiple times each. Ended up getting punched out by his son and locked in a minivan for a few hours until he sobered up. What are the best-kept secrets that flight crews hide from us? As an air traffic controller, we're constantly swearing and yelling at pilots when we're not on the frequency, and when we get on the mic, we use our nice guy voices. One of my all-time favorites is the captain accidentally broadcasting his passenger briefing, welcome aboard, weather in Chicago, and so on and so forth, on the frequency instead of aircraft PA system. He blocked up the ground, ramp, tower radios, all of those for a solid 15 seconds. You automatically become the laughingstock of the airport when that happens. I was learning to be cabin crew at college, and in the event that someone dies on board, the cabin crew make it less obvious that they've passed. They put glasses on them, maybe a hat. Essentially, they dress them up as subtly as possible to not alert or panic the other passengers. Please don't disturb my friend, he's dead tired. I was only a month or two out of my IOE, or initial operating experience, at my first airline job, flying right seat in a regional jet. I'd just come back from the bathroom when the captain pointed out that several flight instruments on his side had failed, and he had reverted to using data from my side. He basically programmed his main flight display to start using data from the second independent system. Soon, however, that went bad as well. The autopilot disconnected, and here we are at 25,000 feet or so, in icing, hand-flying off a tiny little combined last-ditch backup instrument called an IESI, an integrated electronic standby instrument, if memory serves. We declared an emergency, asked air traffic control to point us in the direction of better weather, and tried to figure out what the heck was happening. Icing on both primary pitot tubes, maybe? Though that shouldn't happen because they're heated. In any case, we ended up making a perfectly safe landing after a diversion, and the passengers never had any idea that for a few minutes I was really concerned that things were about to turn very, very bad, and that we were down to our emergency backup gauge. That's the shortened version without most of the techno-babble anyway. Ooh, I've got an original one for you. There's this radio frequency we're all required to monitor. It's called GUARD. It's for emergency use, and it's designed for maydays and for air traffic control to reach aircraft that might have lost radio contact, or to relay messages from aircraft to other aircraft, stuff like that. Every day, this frequency is misused. You'll hear hundreds of professional aviators meowing, yelling obscenities at each other, making fun of one airline or the other. Often what sets it off is some poor guy accidentally transmitting his PA announcement to passengers to the GUARD frequency instead, followed by the very mature outbreaks for about 5 to 10 minutes. It is the worst on the East Coast. Just today I heard an airline aircraft trying to relay info about a medical emergency on that frequency through one of their fellow company aircraft. They couldn't finish any of their sentences without people yelling, "You're on guard! Meow! Nobody cares about your passenger. Hey, you're on guard too, huh?" Oh wow, good to know that the people in charge of piloting these vessels and their hundreds of passengers are essentially behaving like kids on a World of Warcraft server when they're meant to be focusing on their instruments. The scariest moment of my day is when the flight attendant opens the internal bag door, which is the closet we all throw our overnight bags in, without calling us in the flight deck first. There's an alarm and master caution which gets me every time. Pilots here, we only get paid when the doors are closed and the pushback has commenced. If we're delayed or sitting with the door open, we're just as annoyed as you are. At altitude, we're constantly in contact with air traffic control and change to different center frequencies or control for other than US locations. We're also doing fuel checks to make sure the fuel burn isn't abnormal, dodging weather, and probably complaining about scheduling. Pilots are on their phones or reading the newspaper all the time. Ex-airline employee here, often would have someone on board with terrible body odor. You can set the temperature on one end of the cabin hotter, and it localized the smell to one part of the plane. If you see coffee filter bags hanging everywhere, it's because someone smells like an open butt somewhere on the plane. Flight attendants often talk about the hot guy in 23B or whatever seat the hot guy's in, and pilots screw around a lot in the cockpit. They'll take pictures, post on Facebook, watch movies. Automation has taken over a lot of the work on their long flights. I'm not an airline pilot yet, I just got hired by my first airline and I start class next month. But I've been a pilot for 6 years. I primarily teach Chinese airplane pilots how to fly, but I've done some passenger operations in business aircraft on the side. First of all the comments about pilots making cat sounds and Chewbacca noises on the guard frequency are 100% true. Also, when someone leaves an area and switches frequencies, they'll yell, "See ya!" and a dozen other pilots will key up yelling, "See ya!" one after the other. We also enjoy talking crap about people who say, "with you," "got 'em on the fish finder," or "any traffic please advise," and "tree" and "fife." Also, the things that scare passengers don't faze the pilots one bit. We don't give a crap about turbulence or having to do a go-around. The things I don't like are things you generally won't know about. Thunderstorm dodging, microburst alerts, ice, maintenance issues, stuff like that. I'm also a pilot. Sometimes the passengers can be having a nice quiet flight in the back while the pilots are up front dodging thunderstorms and yelling their heads off. We'll not only transport dead bodies, but also live transplants like hearts and lungs. I particularly like the live transplants because we get to cut to the front of the line for takeoff, and we get all the shortcuts to our destination. And a tip for those who get motion sickness, try not to move your heads around. Pilots move their eyes instead of their heads to look at the instruments on the flight deck. Also try to sit in a seat over the wing. This area of the plane doesn't rotate as much during climbs and descents. Sure, flight attendants can't do pilots' jobs, but pilots can't do flight attendants' jobs either. We aren't hired for our people skills. And don't take off your shoes to go to the bathroom. People pee on the floor all the time. My story started off with us blissfully unaware and ended with mild pant soiling. I was flying to France in one of those planes with the TV screens up front to show the flight path and where you currently are. I was just about to fall asleep when the captain asked over the PA if there was a doctor on board and if they could go to a specific seat number. I knew this was bad. The flight path changed to Canada and we had to make an emergency landing. We were stuck there for 2 hours. When we finally got to France, his entire row was quarantined off. I have no idea what the frick happened. Pilot is sleeping and co-pilot is flying and there are dead bodies in the cargo. The source? My mum, who was a former flight attendant. Please don't fly with an ear infection or fluid in your ears. There's a chance you can rupture your eardrum. Flight crews are especially susceptible to this since we're constantly going through pressurization or depressurization when we work. As a pilot, I can tell you that most of the time, the passengers aren't given the full answer as to why a flight's delayed or cancelled. Airlines will typically blame cancellations on unrelated events like weather instead of mechanical issues so they don't have to pay for hotel rooms or meals. Also, chemtrails aren't real. For those of you who believe they are, give your head a shake. My uncle is a pilot. He says that most people don't understand how much of the airplane is run by computers. The pilots are necessary, but a lot of the elements of flying are automated nowadays. There's a joke about the Airbus A380 that goes, "The A380 comes with a pilot and a dog. The pilot is there to feed the dog, and the dog is there to bark at the pilot if he tries to touch anything." I worked with a pilot that was really old. He couldn't stay awake in flight. The first officer kept having to poke him and wake him up. We kept feeding him black coffee, but it didn't help so much. I asked him if he was retiring soon, but he said he couldn't afford it because our airline has no pension program and the pay scale is pathetic. It was pretty scary. There's a special frequency called GUARD that all aircraft are supposed to monitor. It's for emergencies or for when an aircraft ends up on the wrong frequency and the controllers need to get in contact with them to change to the right frequency. It is full of pilots meowing at each other and people accidentally asking for gate assignments and making other radio calls. See, there's that specific thing of pilots meowing on the GUARD frequency again. We have verification from 3 sources that this specific thing is happening. And although I can put the teenage boy behavior down to just that's how us men behave in general, I don't really understand the feline calls. Now, here's one of our commenters who seems determined to list everything that can or has ever happened on an airplane. Prisoners are transported on commercial airline flights sometimes, and law enforcement officers are escorting them. On days with low ceilings or visibility and overall crappy weather, we may be within minutes of making the decision to divert due to fuel, especially if we end up having to hold. This isn't to say we don't have enough fuel. Legally, we must have enough fuel on board to shoot an approach to our destination, go around, fly and land at an alternate airport if we have one, and even then still have 45 minutes of fuel remaining on board. Armed law enforcement officers on board sometimes not escorting anyone. Flying faster to get there earlier if a crew member has a commute to catch home. Chatting or joking with air traffic control if the frequency isn't busy. Delta pilots reporting light chop. Pilots making PA announcements over frequency rather than PA. And yes, the meowing on guard as well as other nonsense. Asking air traffic control how the rides are only to be told they suck at all altitudes. We try to get away from the turbulence, but it's not always possible. And we can't predict it and can't see it. We can only make educated guesses as to where it may be. It's hot back there, during the summer mostly, and we know it. We have it blowing as hard as it can and cold as it can. We're sorry if the plane still ends up feeling like baby's breath. Meanwhile, our air vents are keeping us cool if we're lucky. The iPad that you might see us using in the cockpit has all of our manuals, approach plates, maps, and checklists. Basically almost everything we need. It's really incredible. I just hope they both don't decide to brick themselves at the same time in the air. No, there isn't a single cloud in the sky where we are now. Meanwhile, our destination is encompassed by a massive thunderstorm. We don't like being late either, but we're paid to deliver living passengers. And we can't collect that paycheck if we're also dead. There's a chance your flight could be a pilot's very first flight in an actual jet. He could be fresh out of training, out of the simulator, and actually flying that jet aircraft. Scary, right? Well, that pilot could probably explain every single system of that aircraft in depth. Guys that have been flying the line for years? Maybe not quite as in depth. Oh, and that brand new jet pilot is flying with a Czech airman, who's there to further teach that new pilot about flying on the line. The air pilot can fly for a majority of the flight. We have to at least take off and land. Autoland isn't used for everyday normal operations. Different airlines have different rules on autopilot use. We must have the autopilot on above FL 200, which is 20,000 feet, unless it's inoperable. So we can hand fly up at that altitude, and sometimes we do. If we never go above that altitude, we can hand fly the entire flight, never turning the autopilot on, which we also sometimes do, and it's often encouraged to maintain piloting skills. You could be asleep in the back while the pilots are battling caution messages about some system that decided to throw a hissy fit. Planes often have broken equipment on board. It's just the nature of the business and things just break. We can't always fix it, so there's an approved list of things that might be broken and how long they may be broken before they must be fixed. It could be something that doesn't affect us much, like brake temperature sensor that isn't working, or it could be something that requires the crew to account for it, like a thrust reverser being inoperative or navigation GPS inoperable. Not stuff that makes the flight unsafe, just maybe more work for the pilots. Also, the captain can always reject an aircraft if he feels it's unsafe. If you ask us not to turn on the chemtrails this flight, we are legally obligated to comply. Yes, that's a joke, no one's asked, but if you do, I bet the pilots would get a kick out of it. Also, they're called contrails. We're not customer service, we don't know where your flight is leaving out of or how to help your problem. We'll try to help, but we'll usually try to direct you to a gate agent or actual customer service who can help you. We're not trying to be rude, we just really can't help you. Another person may be sitting up front with the pilots in what's called the jump seat. It could be a pilot commuting to or from work, a Czech airman observing, or an FAA jump seater observing to make sure we're following regulations. Pilots and their families get flight benefits, same for flight attendants, and we can fly for free or discounted. We get on a standby list, and only after all paying passengers are on board, standby passengers may be boarded. It's hours of boredom interrupted by moments of sheer terror on every flight. When a fatal aircraft accident happens, all pilots mourn. Pilots are a pretty close-knit group. We might hate each other's guts at times, but we never wish each other the worst. The view from the cockpit is amazing. Sunsets, sunrises, lightning storms at night, flying over mountains and landscapes, it all never gets old. The captain and first officer are both fully capable of flying the aircraft. Each pilot is designated a role, either pilot flying or pilot monitoring. The pilot flying is the one actually flying, and the monitoring is monitoring what the pilot flying is doing to back him or her up. Usually, crews switch roles every flight, every 2 flights. So the captain is pilot flying for the first 2 flights, and then the flight officer is pilot flying for the next 2 flights. Yes, the flight officer or co-pilot actually does fly the plane just as much. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. A former teacher told us a story that fits this question. Every year he'd make trips to Europe that were for an educational experience, or related to the subject he taught in one way or another. In reality, it was just an amazing way to spend 2 weeks in Europe. One year he took a student's brother with him, since he needed an extra person to have the minimum amount of required students. After the 10-hour flight, the flight attendant walked up to him and asked if said brother was a part of his group. He says yes. Apparently on the flight, this kid stopped the flight attendant and asked her to do the deed with him in the bathroom. She denied, but he continued to ask her several more times throughout the flight. It reached a point where she no longer felt anywhere near comfortable. She asked my teacher if she could notify the authorities and have him sent back to the States. He agreed. There were no immediate flights back home, so a distant relative of his had to be contacted. He stayed with the relative he'd never even met for an entire weekend. He was then put on a flight back home the following week. In short, kid repeatedly asks flight attendant to do the deed with him during a 10-hour flight, she contacts authorities and he gets sent back. Honestly, win for you. He helped you get the numbers up to embark on your trip to begin with, then got kicked off for his awful behavior, hopefully learned a valuable lesson, and you didn't have to put up with him and likely all had a bit of extra space due to his absence. Nice. Flight attendants don't get paid on the ground. Only flying hours are paid. We are slave labor on the ground, and duties are continually added to our unpaid work time because the company knows they don't have to pay us. We show up 2 to 3 hours before we even start getting paid, and some days we'll work up to 14 hours and only get paid 5 or 6 of those hours. It should be illegal. Please be kind when you're boarding the plane and get all angry about your bags and stuff. The flight attendant is a volunteer, and while she's helping you on the ground, she's essentially doing you a favor. One split second of instinct combined with piloting skill decides if you land on the runway or on the side of it. Most of the runways are 45 meters wide, and on a gusty summer afternoon or during thunderstorms, I take God's name more than the Pope himself. Also, a smooth landing isn't necessarily a good landing. One can make a smooth landing and it'll feel good for passengers, but it could be a risky one if the pilot decides to use extra runway. Never shout at your pilot for a bad landing unless he crash lands. And if he does crash land and you shout at him, understand that you're alive because of him. As a wise man once said, better to thump it into the touchdown zone than grease it on 2/3 of the way down the runway. Bonus fact, many a times aircraft coming into land go back up in the air. This is a scary experience for many, as engines, after being relatively quiet for a while, will roar back to life and the aircraft is pulled back up. This is called a go-around. It happens because either the runway isn't clear, weather is something that can't be negotiated properly for landing, or the pilot isn't at the right place and right configuration. Go-around is actually something encouraged by all the senior trainers and authorities, as it's better to go back up in the air than be in a precarious position while forcing into land. So, whenever your pilot does a go-around, be happy that he's a safe pilot. We sat in a backed-up queue for hours in Denver one time. The weather had the airport socked in, nobody was going anywhere until this giant supercell cleared the end of the runway. During that time, suddenly there appeared a mechanic at the front of the cabin on the PA, holding up a 2-foot-long piece of metal he'd pulled from one of the tires. He explained that if the plane hadn't been sitting waiting, he might never have spotted it. It could have come flying out during takeoff, roll, and penetrated the plane's wing, igniting fuel or something like that. Everyone cheered him. What a hero. He possibly saved our lives. And to this day, I have no idea why they let him come on board and tell us this. My cousin is a flight attendant. It's not mid-flight, but airplane lines will fly attendants all over the country just in case they're needed somewhere else. My cousin had to fly out from Portland to Seattle and some other places all in one trip, never having to work. Also, if you're sick, you have to show up anyway and let the people in charge decide if you can fly or not. If you don't, you get 3 warnings, then you're fired. One of our instructors told us that he and his training buddy both fell asleep for about 45 minutes at the same time while gaining hours for licensing. The plane was on trim, which means a set altitude, not steering, in clear skies with 0 turbulence. They both swore that if they ever flew again, they would hand off sleep like handing off the controls. He told me that after both of them awoke, they were frickin' terrified. Neither had any idea what had happened or even if anything had happened. Luckily, it was just over the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of America, and at a low enough altitude where it wouldn't impact commercial airliners. Their trim was set before the nap, so they only gained a couple of 100 feet of altitude. But rest assured, they weren't happy with themselves. They immediately contacted air traffic control, verified their position, and turned around to go back to the airport, white-palming the yoke the entire way. Oh, and this was at night too, because they needed night flying experience. There's a 600-page book in the cockpit with every single thing that could possibly go wrong, from a bulb going out to an engine falling off, a biohazard, or a bomb threat. Most airplanes don't even have a phalange. Flight attendant here, crop dusting, basically tooting whilst we walk down the aisle due to bloating. If you fly frequently, there's a high chance that a flight attendant has tooted right by your head as they walked down the aisle. The majority of the time I'm not flying the plane, I'm on the internet writing stuff, just like I am right now. As an airline agent, I can't even tell you how often the crew is hungover. More often than not. Also, the flight attendants use their personal phones and Wi-Fi in flight, but that's probably not very surprising. I'm calling absolute bullcrap that you see pilots hungover often. We can't legally fly when under the influence of alcohol. That includes being hungover. If we look hungover, it's because we woke up at 4 a.m. to fly you out at 6 a.m. and we slept in a crappy hotel bed. If anyone ever has a suspicion that a pilot is flying under the effects of booze, almost all companies have the pilot get a breathalyzer test before that flight pushes back from the gate. Yeah, I think maybe the cabin crew and flight attendants could get away with it, but I don't think the pilots could, if for no other reason than the people in charge of an airline aren't going to want their expensive machinery to be at risk because of drunk flyboys. I saw inside a cockpit when we flew home from Orlando to Norway, and the pilot was asleep. I kind of freaked out for a second, but the attendee said it's normal. It freaked me out too much. Then the second co-pilot waved at me and said hello in some other language. I'm not a pilot or flight attendant, but I have a good working relationship with my teacher and his friend who are a mechanic and pilot respectively. One such thing that happened was that he had to fix the navigation mid-flight. An uncle who was a BA first officer, a captain's errand boy as he put it, on Concorde. In 1987, North Atlantic just south of Greenland, 1140 IAS, 55,000 feet. Per military radars, a flight of Soviet fighters were practicing intercepts against it. The captain himself didn't know until they were informed on the ground. I'd have gone to flight level 62 and got IAS for at least 1200 if I'd known. Nobody short of an SR-71 could intercept that. Former flight attendant here, landing gear got stuck on descent. We flew in circles for ages, just waiting to find out if we needed to crash land or not. Luckily, the gear eventually came down and the passengers never knew something was wrong. One time, I accidentally spilled coffee creamer on a bald guy's head while he was sleeping during service. Myself and everyone else around him silently agreed to say nothing. He looked as if a bird had pooped on his head. I still feel guilty about it. Oh, and never drink the coffee. I've never seen those machines cleaned. Flight attendant here, we never actually leave the tarmac. People think we're flying, but we really just have big screens that cover all the windows to make it look like we're in the air. But in reality, we just shuffle the planes in and out of one hangar that's behind the airport that you can't see from the road. I'm not a pilot, and this didn't happen in flight, but I saw a pilot watching an adult movie in the cockpit, on a laptop while I was boarding the plane. It felt very inappropriate. Why were you banned from a store or restaurant? I once got barred from a pub for burping. I'm not crapping you, it was in the Conan Doyle pub in Edinburgh years ago. Our small group wasn't being disruptive or anything. My burp wasn't some intentional obnoxious display behavior intended to unsettle other people. It was actually quite discreet and simply the result of drinking carbonated beverages with nothing more to it than that. But we were sitting near the barman heard and we all got thrown out, and for objecting to it, initially thinking it was a bad joke. I got no crap full-on barred. Like I say, it wasn't some over-the-top eruption of a belch. It was the same kind you'd let loose in front of your own mother, followed by a quiet, "Excuse me." I thought at the time the barman was being a neurotic, over-assertive idiot, and my own time as a barman in the years since has only served to reinforce that impression. I got banned from the mall when I was younger because I wore an inappropriate shirt that I bought in the same mall. I had a Harry Potter wand keychain confiscated at TSA, the US airport security, earlier this year. I brought it in the same airport within the security zone on my last flight before that. Yeah, well, what if you started casting spells and stuff? I'm banned from a bar that a friend owns. I've played music in it at a steep discount because we were friends, donated to their fundraisers, got them loads of vintage glassware to use for free, promoted their events, even the ones with other musicians playing. It's because his wife can't stand the fact that he and I dated briefly 35 years ago. She melts down whenever anything triggers her about it and makes his life miserable. I had no idea. Apparently they were dating 30 years ago and broke up because he had to get a rain check on a date with her to be the witness at my City Hall wedding. They got back together 15 years after that. I found out about all this when making a Facebook post about the anniversary of that court date, and he messaged me to take it down. He explained the crazy, and I complied and thought that everything was fine. Then I got invited to the bar for a private party of theirs 6 months later, and both of them are being horrible to me. I was very confused. I asked him what the problem was, and he said, "I don't like how we left things last December." And I was thinking, we? I went back and checked the messages. It seems right after he sent me the explanation, and before I responded apologizing for the triggering and saying I'd comply, someone blocked me in his account. So I think she went in and turned it off so he couldn't see that I was cooperating. So he thought that I blew him off. I sent emails, texts, and certified letters with screenshots showing what happened, but he's still angry at me. So, okay then. It's really sad as I loved that place and I loved playing there, and it's a nexus of our social group, but now I can't set foot inside. Well, sucks for you that got blocked off because of his crap bag wife, and sucks for this idiot that he can't see that maybe it's not a great relationship, that he'd be better off and happier if he just left. Sucks to suck, I guess. I was doing a history project on Poland, and it was well known this teacher gave an extra letter grade for bringing in food from the country we were studying. A friend from my previous school brought me to a bakery that made kolaks that his family loved. I ordered one for my class, paying a deposit and specifying the day I was due to present. I ran in before school to get my order, and the woman behind the counter, the manager, told me that whoever took my order never sent it. There was no kolaks in the store. Despite me presenting my invoice and pointing out the date they agreed to have it ready, she refused to refund my deposit on the basis that we can make it for you tomorrow. I had to call the credit card company and dispute the charge that way. A few days later, my friend called me and asked why we were both banned from the bakery. I was banned from the mall arcade when I was a kid for holding all the whack-a-moles down. I was also banned from an arcade, but for an even more bullcrap reason. It was for picking up quarters. I was a very young kid and saw that people would drop quarters and just never bothered to pick them up, or they didn't know they dropped them. So I'd pick them up from around the machines, nothing dangerous, nothing suspicious, and I'd use them to play. I'm not talking about stealing quarters from people who were going to pick them up, but ones that are just sitting there on the floor with no one around, covered in cobwebs and sand. The attendant argued they weren't mine and belonged to the shop and that I was stealing. I can kind of see the point since it's private property, but I was 7 years old. I spent plenty of my money in the arcade, and I was just using all these quarters I found right back in their rigged claw machines. It was just a crappy thing to do to complain and ban me. All they had to do was say, "Don't pick up the quarters," and I would have stopped. Got a story about someone who wasn't my friend but who I used to run track with. He thought it would be hilarious to put a pebble inside a piece of gum and throw it out the window of the bus on the way to a track meet. He thought it would just stick to the windshield and be a nuisance to someone. It ended up shattering part of the windshield because we're in a bus going motherfrickin' 55 miles per hour. The person we hit followed the bus all the way to the track meet. The cops came, the kid was banned from track. I'm not sure if he was banned from the bus though. When I was 12, my favorite thing to do was play laser tag at the one laser tag place in our town. I'd go every Friday night and play for 3 hours or so. There weren't many other regular players, so nobody else was getting better at it like I was. After about a year, I was just wrecking everyone, and the owner ended up banning me from the place because it was driving away customers. It really sucked because it was my favorite activity, and I was just immediately cut off from it. 6 years later, I found a place in another city that had other players that played regularly, so I was able to start playing again with people at similar skill levels. I got banned from Six Flags Great Adventure in New Jersey several times in the early 90s. Back when I was in high school, season passes were like $40 or something, making it a no-brainer to buy one, if you intended to go at least twice. My friend and I probably went 5 to 7 days a week since we lived so close by. We knew the park and its operations better than pretty much anyone who didn't work there, and eventually we grew too comfortable with taking shortcuts through the employee area, trying to climb things we shouldn't, bothering other guests, and overall being a bunch of New Jersey teenagers, aka jerks. The thing is, the only IDs we had on us were our season passes, which we always assigned fake names for no pre-planned reason. In the summer of 1994, my pass said Oscar Schindler, for example. We eventually got in so much trouble they'd take our passes and tell us we were banned for life. Well, another $40 at the front gate and boom, back in as Itzhak Stern. They needed at that time to figure out the flaws in their system. This is how I got banned from Chuck E. Cheese. I figured out that I could take a ball from the game where you shoot the clown's teeth and use it at the skee-ball machine. The skee-ball machine would count the points but not the ball used, which enabled me to play forever with just one ball and max out the machine. I did it on 2 skee-ball machines before someone noticed and I got banned and kicked out. I got mistaken for somebody else while on holiday a few years back. I popped into a local shop to grab a sandwich and drink, and a staff member forcefully marched over to me and yelled, "You're not allowed in here, I've told you before," as she grabbed my sandwich and bottle of water from me and put them back. Of course, I tried to protest and explained that I'd never been there before and was a visitor to the area, but she gestured for the security guard to come over and escort me out and stood watching from a distance with her arms folded and a smug look on her face, occasionally shouting, "If she doesn't go, I'm calling the police." Thankfully, the security guard was a little more understanding of the situation and happily looked at my driver's license, which proved I lived in a different area. I offered to show it, but then he said, "But perhaps it would be best if you didn't come in here again anyway." I drunkenly stumbled into the big pyramid of wine glasses that were for some reason stacked on the side of the bar. After they all fell and smashed everywhere, causing a huge scene, I proceeded to tell the bartender that it wasn't me. 2 seconds later, I was in a headlock being dragged outside by a large bouncer. My longtime barber had oozing pink eye, and I merely told him I'd come back the next week. He told me not to come back at all. That's a sensitive man right there. You'd think that maybe if you were an ongoing regular and were concerned about catching the old pinky, he'd understand that maybe you didn't want to take your chances with him. Taking pictures of produce and price signs at a small grocery store while shopping. I was just trying to keep track of which of the stores had which food at cheaper prices so I could plan my shopping trips. They thought you were a competitor. It actually does happen. I worked at gas stations for years and had to check competition prices all the time. No biggie, but every so often I'd have to check an inside item price, like cigarettes or candy. It was very awkward and I felt like a criminal. I was banned from the library as a kid. Overdue fees. They let you go up to $70 before cancelling your card. I was an avid reader and my mum hated taking me to the library, always said she would and then changed her mind last minute. It was a 6-mile round trip, so I'd take a wheeled suitcase and get around 25 at a time. The books added up fast. I resorted to stealing books and returning them, and I'm pretty sure some of the librarians just turned a blind eye. They forgive the debt when you turn 18. I was banned from the college cafeteria for taking in a digital food safety thermometer and a copy of the state health department temperature ranges. They were consistently 20 to 40 Fahrenheit low, and food poisoning was a common problem. Nothing says, "We totally hear your legitimate safety concerns," like, "Get the frick out, you're banned." Feeding the seagulls. We ruined the entire upper deck's dining experience with a few French fries. Dozens, maybe hundreds swarmed. It was like a scene from The Birds. People had to evacuate. Back in the late 80s, I was in the Florida Keys with a group of friends. I got drunk and went to bed, and some of the guys went out bar hopping. The next morning, a deputy sheriff showed up at the place we were renting, told us to pack our things and he'd escort us to the county line, and we weren't to come back. So not only did I get banned from an entire Florida county, I never did get a straight story about what the guys who were at the bar did to get us banned. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My friend and I were banned for life from a casino in Las Vegas 20-something years ago. We'd gone for his 21st, which was the week prior. Despite being of legal age, he looked appropriately 12. After being carded by a cocktail waitress for the 700th time, she recommended he go to the security desk, show his ID, and get a stamp on his hand showing he was 21. That way he wouldn't have to keep pulling out his license. Great! We go to security. They stamp my hand in 2 seconds, but start examining his ID real closely. They pull out the guideline for all of the state's driver's license, call over a supervisor, And finally, they just say, "No, sorry, this is fake. It says under 21 on it." My friend at first calmly tried to explain that he turned 21 the week before and was under 21 when he got the license, which is why it was on there. He lived in one state, was going to college in another, and hadn't gone home to renew his license yet, but it wasn't expired, so it was valid. They said, "This is a private establishment, we're not comfortable with it, and we're asking you to leave." Now, he had a bad temper, which I knew, and he'd been drinking. I tried to defuse the situation and said, "Hey, screw this place, there's 100 casinos left on the strip, let's go somewhere else." He agreed and we headed for the door. Then 10 feet from the exit, I hear, "Screw it, I'm giving that jerk a piece of my mind." And 5 minutes later, we were escorted to a room off the floor, had our pictures taken, and we were told we were banned for life, and if we ever returned would be charged with trespassing. I haven't been back to Vegas since then, but if I do, I'd like to walk in to test their facial recognition software. I got banned from a local Kmart about 25 years ago for figuring out that if you just slapped the handle on the old twist-turn candy dispensers that took a quarter, it would give you free candy. Yeah, they call that stealing. They took my photo and everything. For the record, I did in fact know it was wrong, and I don't dispute on a technicality that I was stealing. It actually taught me a good lesson, honestly. Still though, I was just a kid and being walked into a security office for my photo was terrific. I tried to pay my cover or entry fee to a bar one time with $2 bills, and instead of taking my money, the bouncer told me to leave in a not super polite manner. I got banned from the local orthodontist because during an appointment my mum asked the doctor why her degree was from the US. We live in France. My mum was genuinely curious and had just wanted to talk, but for some reason the doctor took it really badly. He insulted my mum while I had the cheek retractor in my mouth and left the room. Fortunately, it was my penultimate appointment, and on the last one he was really aggressive and told us never to come back and to go see someone else for my siblings. I was banned from a Kmart. A friend and I went to the local one and took one of those air duster can things and froze bouncy balls with it. If you tip it upside down and spray it, super cold liquid comes out, cold enough to freeze things and even cold burn you. We froze bouncy balls and shattered them, on the ground. We did it to 2 of them. We were both banned. We were also 17 at the time. We were idiots. My family has been banned from the local Marco's Pizza for years because of my mum. She used to have some anger issues and also really loves garlic butter. When the Marcos forgot to include the garlic butter with the order, she called and asked them to deliver the single cup of garlic butter to our house. The Marcos reasonably said they can't do that, but she could come and get it. She stormed over there with our pizza and proceeded to smear the whole thing on their windows and counters. Haven't had Marcos since. On the one hand, I get being peeved. They could have done more, like maybe giving you a $5 gift voucher or something next time. But on the other hand, if you're really already driving over, don't make that journey some Pyrrhic gesture that removes the thing you love, the garlic butter, from your life forever. I used to work at a sushi restaurant. I got fired or banned because I told the manager that some of the food smelled like it was expired and maybe we should throw it out. Next thing I know, she's giving me my check and kicking me out. For legal reasons, I can't say the name, but I will say it's in the San Fernando Valley. They have 2 locations, one in Encina and one in Tarzana. Their name has 3 words. I went to a bar that had newly opened with friends. Ordered some drinks, cocktails and stuff. They took forever to make it, and after an hour, we still didn't have all the ordered drinks, and some of the ones we did get were wrong. So we wanted to leave and requested the bill. They gave us the full bill, like they wanted us to pay even for the things we never got simply because we ordered them. And of course, they expected a generous tip. We argued that we wouldn't pay for drinks that we never got. They called us liars and jerks, threatened to call the cops, and that from now on we were banned from that establishment. We told him we didn't mind and to go ahead and call the cops. When he went into his bureau to call, we quickly calculated what we owed, slapped the money on the table, and got the heck out of there. They went out of business like a half-year later and had to sell the bar. The new owner is okay. Went to a training course out of town when I was 21, and because it was a long journey, the entire group just booked hotel rooms for the night. I booked a single room for myself and got placed on the opposite end of the hotel from the rest of my group, who were all sharing with classmates. Only time I left the room after arriving was to get some dinner and then to go to the bar to watch a football match, where I sat with lecturers who accompanied us and spent the time chatting with them and the barman. Headed to bed at about 11. As I was heading up to my room, I passed my group who were heading out to a nearby nightclub. I had a quick smoke with them outside before they took my number as a kind of emergency contact for themselves. Anyway, next morning comes and I was down in the lobby for 7, grabbing some tea and some breakfast, and I went to ask for something at the reception, when I overheard a group of elderly people in front of me complaining at the desk about the noise last night. Apparently my group had come back completely off their heads and brought back a lot of friends from the nightclub. The manager had every room inspected before we left the property and was going to charge for any damages done. Honestly, it was completely understandable. Some rooms, from what I gather, were utterly trashed. I nipped out for a smoke, knowing my room was perfectly fine. Heck, I even stripped the bed down before I left to save housekeeping the bother. But nope, I got called to the desk and told I was being charged an extra $300 for damages done. I inquired about the damages and asked to be brought up and shown them. I went up, followed by the manager, a receptionist, housekeeping, and one other staff member, and they showed me the, quote, damaged room. They told me it was a disgrace and that we were barred, and the cops could be called if we refused to pay the damages. It was incredibly condescending and snobbish. But he shut up very fast the moment I asked if we should compare the time-stamped images I took upon entering the room for the first time the previous day to the current damage he was charging me for. I took my phone out and opened it and flashed the pics. He didn't even look at it. All the damage that I'd caused was there when I arrived the previous day and was at worst minor that any resident handyman could fix in minutes. The manager was looking to make a profit on a Tuesday night and was looking to con a group of students out of it and got too greedy and it cost him. I informed the lecturers and asked very loudly if I should indeed call the police due to them trying to scam us, but we were late for day 2 of the course, so I just left. Nobody paid. I filed a complaint after I left. The hotel was lovely, to be fair, and I tried to go back a few years later with my partner as a surprise getaway present for her, but wouldn't you know it, I was banned from the hotel. My uncle always told me to take pics when entering a hotel room, and obviously the same crap had happened to him previously. My roommates and I, along with a few friends, went out to a bar one night to drink. We had grown a single beautiful watermelon in our yard and brought him along to the party with us. Named him Walter Melon, pronounced Melone, snuck the watermelon into the bar and generally just passed it around and praised him for being a good melon. At first, the bouncers didn't care. They came up to us and just told us to be careful with it. Then one of my friends got pretty drunk and started holding it above his head and dancing with it. At this point, security decided they'd had enough of our shenanigans and tried to take it from us. My drunk friend agreed with them that he'd leave with the melon. A few minutes later, he made it back to the bar with the melon under his jacket. He'd snuck in through the back and avoided the bouncers. Once they saw the melon again, they got pretty angry and kicked us all out. We argued for our melon back, but to no avail. Rest in peace, Walter Malone. Funnily enough, there was this other group of guys who had left the bar and had seen or heard about the melon incident. As we were all hanging outside the bar waiting for an Uber, they drove past, stopped, and handed us a pumpkin. So, we ended the night melonless, but with a new pumpkin friend. We got banned temporarily, but I could probably go back. Sounds like it wasn't entirely a fruitless endeavor. And I say that because I'm fairly certain that technically a pumpkin is a fruit. Shame about your melon compadre, though. Rest in peace, Walter. A bar owner of a dangerous dive bar where I got super drunk and enlisted the help of 10 regulars to beat the crap out of one of my friends. He was hospitalized and they double-charged me before he left and then I was banned. It's been years and to this day we still don't know what started it. Someone got jumped behind the bar nearly every Friday night, so it was only a matter of time. I talked it over with my police officer buddy and they sent officers to request the recording of the parking lot from that night. The tapes were apparently missing and we were crap out of luck, wouldn't you know it? I just got thrown out of a restaurant for shouting at another diner. She had been insulting her child loudly for 10 minutes. The kid didn't do anything in response and just kept eating. You can't eat properly. You're gross. I don't know what she thought the kid was doing wrong. Maybe not using a fork properly? Twice the woman did that thing that people do to mock disabled people. You know? Ugh. And this was all loud enough that nobody could ignore it. All of the other diners were turning round to glare at her. I was wondering how to intervene. There was too much anger in my mind. Then her partner said something quietly about how she was spoiling everyone else's lunch, and she snapped back, "It's your fault for not restraining the kid." At this point, I lost it. I jumped up, pointed at her, and shouted, You are the problem." And I told her that children should be encouraged and praised, that she was setting the kid up for a lifetime of feeling worthless. And how dare she treat a child that way? I don't remember what else I said. I was full-on berserker angry by this point. "Excuse me," said the staff. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "Oh, of course. I'm sorry," I said to the staff. "I'm sorry," I said to the other diners, and then, "But I'm not bloody sorry to you. I don't think that woman will change. I expect she'll punish the child when they get home. But the child will never forget this day. Hopefully they'll know that someone opposes her mother, that someone can fight in their corner. That was 1,000 times worth getting thrown out of a restaurant." Zookeepers. What's the lowdown, dirty, inside scoop on zoos? Some people like to bring fruit and stuff to throw into the animals' cages, even though they're not supposed to. If you're around and someone throws a pineapple into the gorilla or chimpanzee dens, get the frick out. They will throw that thing full blast at someone. I saw a man get hit full force right in the side of the head and he was lights out. Pineapple exploded on impact. Paramedics came and everything. I had to draft the zoo's contingency plan for all sorts of emergencies. Flood, tornado, extreme heat, war, attacks, you name it. The plan included a prioritized list of which animals in the collection we'd have to sacrifice to feed the other animals in extreme situations. I literally created a zoo food chain. Humans were left off the list entirely. Rhinos may look super intimidating, and they can hurt you, don't get me wrong, but they really just act like big dogs. They love being scratched and they'll eat all the fruit out of your hand. A zoo kind of place I worked at on occasion calls them winos because they roll over and whimper because they want belly rubs with a bristle brush. Late to the party, but I wanted to mention all the older animals. Sometimes people don't realize there are older critters who have health issues. A lot of older fish we had were kept in back tanks away from view because people assumed normal old fish issues were a result of poor husbandry and they'd get upset if they were on display. Imagine having your 17-year-old incontinent dog in a zoo. People would think it looks emaciated and pathetic. Along the same lines, zoos have improved significantly in terms of animal husbandry over the years, but a lot of older animals have been in zoos since before these changes occurred. I remember working with a group of chimps, and one of the old chimps would tickle his pickle while staring at me as I'd clean the outside of the enclosure. I had to remember this guy joined the zoo at a time when they'd dress chimps up in kids' clothes and make them have tea parties and crap. He had some mental issues that definitely weren't his fault. Thankfully, that troop has gotten better housing and care and has now started acting more normally, even reproducing with their own troop members and acting like real apes should. I volunteer at an aquarium, and people always ask about whether the sharks that are in with the fish ever eat the fish. Officially, we say, oh, we keep them well fed enough they don't. But on more than one morning on my initial walk around, I found remains of fish that definitely weren't meant to be eaten. On a particularly memorable occasion, I found the head of a large porgy just sitting on the bottom. A diver went in and got it before the guests arrived. I mean, I believe you. I've always been incredulous that anyone could claim to reliably control the behavior of animals, all of whom are unpredictable at the best of times. I guess the only part I'm still confused about is how this never happened in front of customers. Seeing a shark obliterate a small cute fish would either be nightmare fuel or the highlight of a kid's day, depending on the kid. I've designed equipment and caging for zoos. I've been told many horror stories on how some animals would get hurt or even killed because of trying to find ways out of their caging. They can range from really stupid to incredibly brilliant. I had to replace a giraffe indoor pen. The previous one had vertical bars. Think old jail cell bars. A bull giraffe stuck his head out and then turned his head and went back to the side through another set of bars to see what was behind him. He freaked out and essentially hung himself. So we couldn't use vertical bars that they could stick their heads through. I witnessed a silverback gorilla having a really bad day. He seemed tired of the crowd and put a box on his head to make the world go away. People kept watching, he kept getting annoyed, and finally he threw the box off, charged us, and pounded on the glass. And yeah, I'm well aware that glass can take several shots from a .50 caliber rifle, but the explosive bang from the gorilla hitting the glass was insane and terrified everyone. Then there's ostriches. They run primarily on instinct. I designed a cage for the vet to treat them with. It was entirely enclosed and had multiple small doors all around the cage. The reason is that the vet told me about an instance where an ostrich got its foot cut and needed stitches. They got the bird in the cage and one of the vets fed the bird and the other stitched up the cut. No anesthesia, just a diversion. The bird kept eating and didn't care about getting the stitches. In a different zoo, they needed to replace the caging of a very large bird of prey. I don't remember the species, but I do remember seeing what its claws did to the aluminium tubing cage they kept it in. The aluminium was shredded, and whoever was on the other side was either going to have a very bad day or get what they deserved for annoying this bird. I of course went with stainless steel heavy gauge rod for the cage. The shop hated all the welding, but in the end the cage was way nicer and stronger than the old one. I didn't get to travel much with the installation crew, but I was in the shop supervising the building of the caging. There were many times I've had to have things re-welded or redone because of safety and quality control issues. Remember when you visit a zoo that oftentimes your life depends on someone that isn't qualified or is underpaid and overworked. Whenever I visit a zoo, I look at the structure design and how it was put together. Too many times I see welds that are of poor quality and barely hold the structure in place, let alone stop something big and heavy that's angry. I work with dolphins, and let me tell you, those creatures are randy motherfrickers. We have 2 smaller boys together, and they've been seen stimulating each other. Our 3 female dolphins have freshwater hoses that lead into the pool to play with. They flip themselves upside down, lay on a surface, and let the water do its thing. We also have another male dolphin separate from the others that likes to show his member to families. It's pretty funny to watch, to be honest. Dolphins are just weird. Fun fact about the local zoo I learned when I worked maintenance, there's a wolf enclosure. There's info about the wolves, it's maintained. They're just shy and in their shelter. There are no wolves and never have been. My partner was a zookeeper in Dallas. Safety protocols for when a large, dangerous animal escapes its enclosure dictate that you lock yourself in whatever room you can get to quickest and grab the nearest weapon, which for most zookeepers is a broom or rake for cleaning up animal doo-doo. We told the public that we had closed the baboon exhibit because a baboon had unfortunately passed away and the troop was, quote, grieving. In reality, they were throwing parts of the body around and there was nothing we could do about it. When I was a teenager in the 90s, I did volunteer work at the Oakland Zoo. There weren't many of us, so we got to choose where we helped out, so I choose to work with Bhakti, the 32-ish-year-old Bengal tiger, nearly the oldest living in captivity when he finally passed. I chose him because he was beautiful and he always seemed lonely. He had pacing syndrome hardcore, so his entire paddock was green and lush, except for the paths along the outer fence line and 1 or 2 diagonals he used to get into and out of his night cage. The keepers did their best with him, but had clearly written him off. He was grumpy, antisocial, and hid from the public, swiped and hissed at his keepers, and ignored all of the enrichment toys and food put out to keep him mobile. They had a few young Siberian tigers in quarantine already, waiting to be put on display. They just had to wait for him to pass, and the stubborn old cat had lived in spite of them. He'd always start the morning by pacing his fence line, so I started pacing with him. No eye contact, no sounds, just walking back and forth for an hour or 2. After a couple of weeks, he started chuffing at me when I arrived, so I learned how to mimic it to say hi back. Another month, he'd actually break his pacing circuit to walk with me, jogging his ancient, arthritic butt from wherever he was across the green sections to match me. The poor guy just needed a friend. I still get a bit misty-eyed thinking about him, just a lonely old cat who had to spend the last years of his life basically alone. Don't get me wrong though, the keepers really did do their best, but they couldn't spend all day with one animal like I could. They had many duties and creatures to care for, and he had a really steep barrier to entry as a friend. As grumpy as he was, I still think he was good people. I worked in an animal refuge in Bolivia. We were told on our first day to not let the tapir turn its back on you. Forgetting that vital piece of info, 3 days later, I was filming the tapir as it started to turn its back on me and my friend. Before we could react, its eggplant did a 180-degree turn and projectiles splooged all over my phone and gaping mouth. We couldn't get rid of the smell for days. If you ever come close to a tapir, do not let it turn its back on you. Wow. So the narrator was expecting a shower of doo-doo, not what we ended up getting. My god, that is a plot twist. And this happened regularly enough that you were warned in advance? What the hell is wrong with you, tapir, you prevert? Listen, lions know full well that they can't get through the glass. They do that just to get attention. I worked at a zoo, in their museum function, not with the animals, and there was no glass in the big cat's enclosure. There was a giant moat, which the tigers were always playing in, and a 20-odd-foot straight vertical concrete wall. You could tell when they were in play mode. They'd pace back and forth along the edge of the moat and suddenly jump in, surprise, and roll around on their backs. For the casual visitor, they seemed like an oversized house cat. While they absolutely had small house cat-like behaviors, I could never for a second forget what they could do. There was this one particularly traumatic event with the lions on a very warm and very packed day. The zoo was inside a large park, so various animals wandered around the zoo all day. One unfortunate day, a large deer fell into the lion enclosure. The lion stalked it and ran it down within 30 seconds and tore the deer to shreds, in front of a dozen horrified adults and screaming kids. I felt kinda bad that so many people saw, but like, circle of life. I mean, that was probably the best day ever for that lion though. Imagine, a warm pizza and Xbox controller falling from the sky into your lap. That's the kind of day he's having. I used to work at a zoo a few years ago. An elephant died while I was there, and to transport the body out of its enclosure, they had to chop him up. Rest in peace, Toto. Dead zoo animals are sometimes fed to carnivores. There's a farm and zoo in the UK that uses crocodiles to get rid of dead cows. The owner once said he'd like the same end when he dies. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. The poor penguin keepers can never quite get rid of the miasma of dead fish that envelops them. As for me, the stinkiest job I ever had to do was cleaning out the duck ponds. Managed to empty a whole train carriage that evening, even though I'd changed and my work clothes were double-bagged. That's the truth. As a teen, I worked as a janitor at a private school. One of my duties was dumping out and rinsing the kiddie pool belonging to the duck. The muck on the bottom of that thing, especially in summer, frickin' stank. My wife was a zookeeper, and I used to volunteer there a lot. Most zookeeping is just picking up doo-doo and making and delivering the animals food. The last animal that was at least scary was a cheetah. They were pretty cool, ignoring everything as long as they had food. The most scary to me were the giraffes. Back then, you went into the enclosures with them, and they'd sometimes swing their heads around and try to club you just to be pricks. You had to be careful. And the job would actually be fantastic if they didn't let human beings into the zoo. I went on a behind-the-scenes tour of the zoo once. Saw quite a few bunnies come out during the tour. The neighboring park had a problem with people abandoning pet rabbits, you see. It was pretty clear the dumb bunnies were getting into predator enclosures. The tour guide confirmed that they were regularly getting eaten. Tour guides also indicated other urban wildlife problems. Raccoons, possums, squirrels, and birds were regularly consumed. They said that when they drained the lion enclosure moat for maintenance, it was filled with the bones of small animals. The most amusing stories were about the orangutans, who were wicked smart. Zookeepers had trained them to give over items in exchange for food in case they needed to get something from them in the enclosure. But you see, orangutans are smart, and they realized that if they broke things up and handed them back in small pieces, they'd get more food. They once disassembled a radio that accidentally got left in the enclosure. When there was an opossum in the enclosure, the results were a bit more gruesome. If you work with the animals, there's a good chance you'll not be able to have any kind of social life between the long hours and weekends and the stench. I've been kicked out of stores after work because I apparently stunk way worse than I thought I did, even after scrubbing off. And I'm around animals every day, but I still can't stand when otters and sea lion keepers around me are in an all-hands meeting. The rotten fish and ferrety otter smell combo is a gagger. Meanwhile, I work with apes, and they say that I smell like I haven't showered in a decade, and this is after I take a shower. Some zoos intentionally put chickens in enclosures with non-predatory animals, as the chicks go around eating pests and bugs all day, which keeps the other animals happier. I work at a zoo in a northern country. I can't say which as it will give it away. We had a white tiger, and we were quite famous for it. One day, the zoo announced the tiger had died of natural causes. Whilst working there a few years after he died, I was told by a keeper that there was actually a problem with the electric fencing in his enclosure that the zoo managers refused to pay to get fixed, thinking it would be fine. The tiger was electrocuted to death a few weeks after they found the problem. They covered up the whole thing by saying they weren't sure how he died, but that he was old. It's still a zoo secret to this day. I worked in two completely different departments, elephants and neonates, but the drama between keepers was insane in both, like attempted murder level insane. We didn't have mad drama, but damn near everyone was doing it with everyone else. There was a girl from birds that cheated on her boyfriend, who was also in birds, with a guy on small primates. It turned into a whole thing with everyone having an opinion. Well, good to know that zoo staff are the same as literally every other workplace on the planet under the facade of helpfulness and being in tune with nature. Gossipy, factious, and crazy romance drama. Classic humans. Maybe we're the ones who should be in a zoo. Oh boy, I remember my first day working with foxes. My coworker was giving a tour of the facility to a family where they got to play with the foxes, and she made a big deal about, "Make sure you don't touch anything wet in here. It might be fox pee, and it will absolutely not come out of anything, including skin." She even gave them gloves to wear. Then they left, and she told me to start cleaning. I said, "Wait, don't we have to protect ourselves from the fox pee, like you said?" She sort of laughed and said, "You work here now. Get used to your new smell." Sure enough, I inevitably got some fox pee on my hand. I washed it several times, I smelled it before bed that night, and sure enough, it smelled exactly like fox pee, very strongly. Washing not only didn't remove it, it didn't seem to even diminish it a little bit. By now I've stopped noticing, but nobody else has. Our lions will empty their bladders onto guests if they get too close, which is always funny to see, not so funny to smell. I work with large tortoises. We had these 5-gallon buckets for cleaning animal doo-doo out of enclosures and other buckets for feeding them fresh grass that we cut. The first day on the job, I took both buckets into the pen and started dumping out the grass. Then I went around to collect the number 2. I heard this awful loud grunting and something breaking. One of the 300-pound males tried to mate with the bucket in front of visitors and flattened it. He'd even follow me around just in case I might leave more innocent buckets unattended. I spoke to a zookeeper at the National Zoo in DC. We were watching another keeper inside of the cheetah enclosure, and I asked him about the dangers involved. He said a cheetah is harmless to an adult human because it only hunts smaller creatures. I asked which creature was the worst to go in with, expecting hippo, elephant, or crocodile as an answer. Without hesitating, he said, "Zebras," and then leaned close and whispered, "They are the biggest jerks on the planet. They will bite and kick for no reason." I still think it's hilarious that of all the teeth and claws out there, it's the striped donkeys that are the worst. The amount of injuries you can just casually pick up from animals is crazy. I've been kicked in the chest by a kangaroo, almost had the unspeakable act committed against me by an emu, been attacked by a wombat and a bat, bitten by a monitor lizard and a carpet python, had a rhino charge at me, and been scratched by a macaque. My old boss had this awesome scar from a snow leopard attack, and this guy I work with now has his entire left forearm mangled from an orangutan. To explain some of these examples, regarding the emu unspeakable act story, I was cleaning out its outside enclosure and was told to not squat down in front of him as he was in season, as in it was his mating season. Well, you can guess what I forgot. I squatted down in front of him to pick up some crap, and I found out the hard way that ratites, or flightless birds, do not have a cloaca and in fact have full-blown members. The orangutan? They are not the gentle giants you think they are. All apes, and I mean all of them, have the capacity to maim, disfigure, or kill if you annoy them enough. Don't look them directly in the eye for an extended period of time, don't smile at them, and for the love of God, don't invade their personal space. Had a piercing ripped out by a macaw, fingers and hands torn up from handling and training conures and other large parrots, quite a few nasty bites from small mammals like hamsters, gerbils, and ferrets if you'd believe that, a few injuries from horses, but nothing out of the ordinary. It also shocks you how dumb people can be. There could be a huge sign that says, "Hello, I'm an echidna, not a porcupine," and people will still ask if that's a baby porcupine. You get used to the same jokes every day, like when you're cleaning up the outside enclosures in view of guests, someone will eventually say, "Oh, what a strange animal, I wonder what kind it is," in regards to seeing a human, or the amount of people who scream, "Hump day," when they see a camel. I have no qualms about picking up animal doo-doo barehanded. I know what my animals have been eating, I know what's in their digestive system, and to me that makes it more bearable. I can have long discussions about poop consistency with my coworkers, and in fact, that's what a lot of general health talks are about. Homer's stool was a little looser than normal this morning. I wonder if something happened overnight to stress him out. You get used to being stinky as well. I currently work 8+ hours with primates daily, and I feel awful for the people who share a space with me when I go to the gym directly after work. Primate doo smells very similar to human stuff. When I was at the zoo, I smelled exclusively of rhino pee and I could not get it off me. When you're cleaning underneath the perches, parrots will wait for you to look up before taking a dump. They have good aim. That's how you get crap in the mouth. Do not look up. This does not surprise me in the slightest. Birds are the devil, and all of them are out to get us at any given second, and the bigger they are, the meaner. I still appreciate them for how real they are about it, though. Not quite a zookeeper, but I'm training to be one. The zebras and Przewalski horses are ruthless, and they'll tear apart any unfortunate wild kangaroo that dares break into an enclosure. They love the thrill of the chase and the subsequent kill when they get bored. Former coworker got a job at the aquarium. He was basically the night watchman, making sure nothing exploded when the aquarium was closed. The thing is, he couldn't actually do anything about that. A ray jumped out onto the open touch pool, so he gently picked it up and set it back in the tank. No harm done, the ray was fine. But he got chewed the F out for handling an animal. Policy is to call the expert handler for that department and have them come in to avoid any liability and whatnot. By the time you get them to pick up the phone at 3 a.m., get up and drive into the city, it'll have been like 40 minutes at best, assuming that they came in at all. So his job was really just to stand there staring as the animal suffocated. He ended up quitting when he tried to call out sick because he had the flu. He had it so bad he literally couldn't stand up straight, and part of the job was to walk the narrow, hanging walkway over the largest tank in the world, which includes sharks, alone, at night. And then they told him to come in anyway. I'm a small animal vet now, but I worked in a zoo before vet school. Zoos are one of the biggest purchasers of Calvin Klein's Obsession cologne. The cologne has animal musk in it, and it drives the big cats wild. We used to spray it on everything. To explain, all captive animals require some sort of enrichment in their environment. In zoos, they have rooms full of toys, scents, and treats that the animals get on different schedules to keep things interesting for them. Think of it like getting a new dog toy or treat at the local pet store. Cats, in general, are very pheromone-driven animals, so the cologne is used almost like catnip for domesticated cats. I remember soaking a whole bunch of toys and tossing them into the enclosure. I used to work at a zoo, and I can tell you that cold weather makes the animals more active, so go on a chilly day or first thing in the morning to see the best show from the animals. Also, those free-roaming peacocks are really stupid and sometimes go into the lion's exhibit and get torn apart. My mum worked at a zoo when I was a kid, and there were some things that were kept under wraps. For one, a hyena escaped once and they had to track it down. Also, a pack of dogs got into the zoo and killed most of the wallabies. The worst story was that a group of teenagers broke in the 80s and pulled some legs off the flamingos. That one always really bothered me. When did you witness a crime being committed by someone who had no clue what they were doing? When I worked at Hollywood Video, before that evil corporation went out of business, finally, a man came into my store and bought one bag of popcorn. When I opened the register, he pulled out a box cutter from his pocket and told me to give him all the money. My first reaction was to laugh. I couldn't believe I was being robbed. Then he waved the box cutter around and saw he wasn't horsing around, to which I told him he wasn't getting anything. He said he'd cut me, and I told him good luck climbing over the counter to get to me. He then placed his hands on the counter and leaned towards me. I grabbed a box cutter of my own and said, "Well, would you look at that? A Mexican standoff." Now, here's where it gets silly. The man asked if I was threatening him. I said, "No, sir," still laughing at the situation. He proclaimed he was calling the police, and I said, "Please do." He did, and then he waited for the police to arrive. He told them I brandished a box cutter and threatened his life. I then showed the fine officer our security footage, and wouldn't you know it, he arrested my new friend. That's my favorite work story. Call it bullcrap if you want. I worked at a bowling alley in high school. We had a guy climb up into the ceiling in the restroom and wait until we were closed so that he could climb down and rob it. Not only did he not get any money because everything was locked in a gigantic safe from the 1930s that probably weighed over 1,000 pounds, but the guy couldn't even get out of the building. All the steel fire doors were padlocked on the outside, and I guess he didn't want to risk being seen smashing the glass on the front doors, since it was right by a busy road. Our wannabe criminal did the only logical thing, which was to go back to the bar and drink all night. The manager found him passed out on the floor when he opened up in the morning. An Aussie guy I knew was out drinking in Canada with another Aussie mate. His mate left early to go back to the flat they were sharing in Vancouver, and they were accosted in a dark alley by two men with knives. Being absolutely sloshed off his face, he failed to pick up on the man's intent, or their knives, and simply pushed them aside saying, "Yeah, nah, sorry mate, I'm Australian," and continued to F off home. The poor fellow later realized he'd just brushed off two armed muggers by telling them he was Australian and ignoring them. There were two guys from my high school that robbed a little convenience store. They had ski masks and gats, and the robbery went pretty smoothly for them. But they also decided to wear their Letterman coats with their names on the back. They were later arrested. Maybe they were that dumb, but I'd also say that there was a non-zero chance that those guys got framed by other people who knew what they were doing with their disguises. Although I suppose the police would do their due diligence and search. But can you imagine getting your high school bully back by wearing a Letterman jacket with their name on it while you rob a place? Back when I worked at Walmart, one of the best laughs I ever got while working there was watching two middle-aged women run into the store, grab about 50 of those Visa gift cards from the rack, then run out of the store laughing while they did it. You have to activate them. They're completely worthless without being activated. I bet those ladies were pretty upset when they realized they'd just stolen a crapload of nothing. I was parked in the far end of a parking lot of a 24-hour grocery store, sitting in the driver's seat, checking a few emails and letting my window defrost. I had the window rolled down just a tiny bit, basically enough for someone to fit their arm through if they really tried. That's relevant very soon. A guy approached from the back, so I heard him and looked that way. He tells me to get out of the car. The door is locked and he's holding a knife towards the window. He doesn't have a firearm. I just kind of look at him and say, "No," with a confused look. My firearm is in my shoulder holster, but my coat is buttoned up. He awkwardly tries to open the door, can't, and then actually sticks his arm through the tiny part of the window that's rolled down. I immediately hit the button and roll it up, so he's just stuck there, screaming in pain and pounding on the window with his other hand. He finally drops the knife, so I let the window down a bit and he runs off. In college, I worked as a loss prevention guy for one of the big boxes. Sit in a little room and watch cameras to catch shoplifters. We were having a problem with customers' wallets being stolen out of the men's fitting rooms. The victim would go in, try on a new pair of pants, come out to show his wife, and then when he went back to the fitting room, his wallet would be gone. So one afternoon, I get a call from the sales staff about a fight in the men's fitting room. I run down there to find a 6'2" black guy with a 5'2" white guy in a headlock. The black guy caught the white guy coming out of his room with his wallet. Turns out the black guy's wallet was his Secret Service badge and credentials. Whoops! A few weeks ago, I was getting home from late night classes when this guy jumps out and says, "Give me all your money," or something like that. The problem is, he has no weapon. No shooter, no knife, he wasn't even a threatening-looking guy. I just sort of walked past him back to my dorm. The guy keeps at it until we get near my dorm. He gets in front of the door and demands my money. I pick up a rusted pipe that's always near the door and he backs off. Laziest criminal ever. I had a chav do a similar thing, but he wouldn't let me past him. I'd just gotten off the train, I was tired and irritated by the 4-hour journey, so I wasn't in the mood. He follows me until we get to an underpass before jumping in front of me. I want to get into the underpass and he won't let me, he's demanding money. Now the problem with chavs is they don't weigh much, and I've been doing martial arts for years, so I'm strong for a girl. The guy ends up on his bum as I push him out the way and keep walking. People around me just kind of look and carry on walking themselves. A friend of my cousin went to a Circle K in a small town and went to buy alcohol. He then went to the counter, they asked for ID so he could purchase, obviously. He showed them and then put them at weapon point and said he was robbing them. Stupidest kid ever, and he was mega caught. I think he's still in jail on several charges. This wasn't really a stupid criminal, more of a gentleman robber, I'd say. I went out at like 2 in the morning to buy cigs. I tried a few shops, but they were all closed. Walking home in sorrow, I was accosted by a young man with a knife who asked quite politely for all of my money. I was a very poor backpacker at the time, and the $50 in my pocket was pretty much the last of my money for the month. I showed the guy my empty wallet, hoping he'd leave it at that, but he noticed my bus pass and decided to take that instead. He then handed me 2 cigarettes and apologized for the inconvenience and walked away. In a state of semi-shock, I realized that without my bus pass, I had no way of getting the 5 a.m. bus to work, because of the damn Vancouver transport company, and I expressed my frustration out loud. The guy came back and asked me what was wrong. After I explained, he handed me back my bus pass and said, "Well, we've all got to make a living somehow." My favorite part is where he asks what's wrong. "Hey man, what's wrong?" "Oh, I just got robbed like 2 seconds ago." "Oh, jeez, I'm so sorry. Here, take this bus pass." A couple of people broke into my storage facility once. They cut through the fence and were going through units when they realized there was a camera mounted near them pointed right where they were standing. They panicked, covered their faces up, and decided to get rid of the camera. They climbed on something and started trying to tear the camera down. While they were doing this, there was nothing covering their faces anymore, and they were literally staring into the lens of the camera no more than 3 feet away. Guy comes into my store, purchases an item with a $100 bill, and I give him his change. He says, "That's not enough change," and reaches across the counter into the register drawer to try and grab back the $100 he gave me. So I slam the drawer in his fingers. The end. Cha-ching, motherfricker, except my drawer won't close. I once foiled a clever plan by an elderly guy at the department store I used to work at. He had a blazer with countless hidden pockets, and he was filling them with bottles of oil of Olay moisturizer. The loss prevention guy called me to help corner him. As he was leaving the door, he saw that I was looking at him and started to run. We ran after him and he looked back at us. That's where he messed up. He tripped over his own feet and fell like a sack of potatoes. Most of the moisturizer bottles exploded and he was lubed neck to knee. He smelled fantastic though. You know, if he was spry enough to get up and start running again, I've got to wager it would be really hard to get a hold of him to properly stop him. And if he was elderly, all of that moisturizer might have had a nice de-aging effect on his skin, even if his hip was shattered by the fall. I had a drunk guy try to steal a bottle of vodka that we wouldn't sell him. He grabbed it off the poor cashier and just ran for the door. Fairly standard tactic. What he did, however, was stop in the door to taunt us with his brilliant scheme, literally turned in the door to stop and go, "Woo!" and gave us the finger. Whereupon he was hit in the chest by the security guard and Big Rab, the 6'5" guy who stocks the alcohol aisle. He managed to scramble away from them and down the car park ramp, however. It was a real shame because our car park ends in a 15-foot-high fence to stop people from climbing over it onto the railway tracks on the other side. Utter frickin' moron. His girlfriend didn't even wait with him, she just bought her stuff and left. This one actually happens a lot, but it happened to me one night several years ago during a graveyard shift. I was working alone on a Sunday night at the gas station. Now, this wasn't a bad area, but it wasn't great either, so the general manager figured that they didn't need 2 people watching the store. I disagreed with him, but I digress. I was in the back of the store mopping, doing my best to keep an eye out for people approaching the store so I could run back to the registers before they got inside. Anyway, I was mopping when a van suddenly pulls up in reverse to the store. Just as I start to put the mop aside, literally no more than 2 seconds afterwards, the doors to the back open up and 2 guys with sweaters tied around their heads jump out the back. They rush inside the store, yelling, run up to the counter, grab both of the teller machines and rip out the power cords, running out of the store with their loot and jumping in the back of the van. It speeds off and they hit the road. All of this happened in about 20 seconds and I just stood there and frickin' watched it. What these idiots didn't realize is that the frickin' machines are separated from the cash drawer for this very reason. They effectively made off with $0, but they did me a favor because I didn't have to work for the next 2 days, since the store couldn't operate until they got the new machines in. In short, idiot thieves stole inconsequential registers, thinking they were getting the money in the drawer under the counters with them. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Worked as a cashier for a grocery store. A customer came and placed a random assortment of things up on my register. Candy, soda, a couple of kids' toys, a pre-cooked chicken from the deli. She mentioned to me that she was from Oregon and would like the tax removed. We can do that in Washington state for customers from specific states. To do this, she had to give me her ID so I could record the info on it before removing the tax from the transaction. After giving her her total, she said she'd like to pay with a check. She was filling it out and I noticed it was pre-signed. I asked whose check they were and if they were available to come sign the check in front of me. She said they belonged to her mum who was in the car. When she left, I saw her get in the passenger seat of a van and leave, so I took down the license plate as they drove off. After this all happened, I called my floor manager over and told him what happened. We both shrugged and basically said, weird, leaving it at that. Later that day, the loss prevention guy calls me up the stairs, which is normally never a good thing. He tells me that I'd made a good catch because 2 women had been going around town with a stolen book of checks, and I was the reason the cops had an ID and a license plate to go after. In short, a lady gave me her ID to prove she deserved a 78-cent discount on goods she intended to pay for with stolen checks. I was summoned to court to tell this story to a judge. I work at my family's liquor store and we have a debit and credit card machine where we take the card, punch in our store ID, cashier ID, then the amount, stick the card in and then hand it back. This one fellow comes in and grabs a 6-pack from the cooler and comes to the counter. He was the only other person in the store besides a random guy in a corner going through wine. So I ring the 6-pack in and then I saw him grab it. He came up to the till and I asked him how he was doing and he said, fine, and I told him his total as he was just pulling up to the till and he mumbled something and reached into his coat and pulled out a gat and placed it on the counter with the barrel facing me and slid it a few inches forward. Due to being used to people doing that with credit or debit cards, I just stretched out and grabbed the weapon with one hand and the debit machine in the other, automatically. He wasn't holding on to the weapon very firmly, so I just pulled it away, and then I realized I'd grabbed it and it was a gat, not a credit card. So I froze with his weapon in my hand and the debit machine in the other. We looked each other in the eye and then he bolted, leaving the shooter behind. I called my uncle and then the cops, who came and took a statement and afterwards told me that the weapon was empty, so I wasn't in any real danger, but it's still one of the funniest things to ever happen to me. The level of non-committal to this crime really speaks of someone who didn't feel great about committing it. I wonder how desperate this guy was. It was sort of adorable how awkward and inept this went down in the end. Thanks for writing in. I work in a car audio store. This gangster wannabe shows up wanting us to install his amplifier right now. All of my installers are busy and I tell him it isn't going to happen today, but we could probably do it tomorrow. He gets all upset and tells me his boy will install it himself, all he needs is the wires. I show him our amp kits and he picks one out and pays with a credit card and shows me his ID, which is good. So the next thing I see is this fool grabbing a box with some entry-level 12-inch woofers and running out of the door and throwing the box into his ride and peeling out of our parking lot. The store was pretty crowded and more than a few customers saw what just went down and asked if they could chase the guy down. I couldn't believe this idiot just paid with a credit card, and I checked his name and ID and it matched, so I had all the information I needed to have him arrested. But I said, oh, hell no. I just wrote up a ticket and manually punched the card for 3 times the amount, something like $585, instead of $170 for the thing he stole. The charge got approved and was never contested either. I hope he enjoys his speakers. Last week, I just left Qdoba when I saw a kid walk up to a skateboarder and attempt to steal his board. The first kid was followed by 2 of his friends, both of whom were shouting, "Hector, it's not your board, let it go!" Hector did not let go until the 5 cops who were in Qdoba came out and arrested him. They were parked outside. He was not a clever young lad. My dad was in a bank and some guy tried to rob the place. Dad noticed the guy's weapon and told him to shoot him. The guy wouldn't do it after constant demand by my dad and left the place. He'd tried to rob the place with a plastic weapon. Easy way to save the day. Good on you, Dad. Some creepy-looking guy tried to carjack me. I was leaving the supermarket at 8 in the morning on my way through Rotorua to go to Wellington. He knocks on my window and I roll it down about an inch. He asks if I can give him a ride to some gas station. I'm not too familiar with the place, so I ask where it is and he points up the road. Then he tells me I can just drop him at the corner of this street about 100 meters away. I laughed and told him to walk. Then he tried to force his way into my car, a 1973 Mercedes, so I opened the door as hard as I could into him and slammed it shut on his fingers. These doors weigh like 80 kilos. I know this because I had to take them off to fix some rust around the hinges. I do feel a bit bad for possibly breaking his fingers. My sister used to work at a bank in a Walmart, and her co-worker had this somewhat older pickup truck, about 15 years old at the time of the story. It was pretty unremarkable in every way. Stock parts, stock stereo, average looking. Some idiot punched out the driver's side window and stole a CD player, which didn't play past track 7 on any given CD. Mind you, it was stock and also 15 years old. Instead of disconnecting the plugs like a normal thief, he cut all the wires, making it a stolen CD player that now required repair. He also bled all over the inside of the truck because he punched the window in and proceeded to wrap his hand up in one of the girl's spare work shirts. After taking the CD player, he then walks into Walmart and tries to steal a TV. Not one of the newer TVs that only weighs like 25 pounds, a big tube TV that weighs like 80. When he walked out, the alarm went off. He told the person at the door that it was a return and he was simply taking his old one back to his car. Keep in mind that he still had a bloody bank teller's polo wrapped around his hand that had an employee's name on it. An employee who was working at the store at that moment. Of course, the friend and the store pressed charges. The friend was also offered an appearance on one of those judge TV shows, but declined because the case was too stupid. For a daytime judge show. I have a weird take on this question because my Denny's was too inept to be robbed. A man walked in and went to the podium and cash stand. He said he had a weapon and wanted the money in the drawer. The first waitress sighed in disgust and said, "I'm not even on the register," and just walked away. The second waitress was standing nearby and looked at her husband, sitting in the nearest table, and mouthed, "Call the cops." And the husband says at regular volume, "I don't even have my cell phone on me." At this point, the robber decides that maybe this isn't the best route and begins to flee. They caught him about 1/10 of a mile away, on foot. Does anybody remember box tops? For those who don't, they're small squares on the tops of boxes of food that if you cut out and bring to an elementary school, that school gets 10 cents per box top. When I was young, still in elementary, a kid in my class stole the class's stash of box tops because he wanted the money for himself. So stupid. Not really a crime, but I figure it fits. This actually just happened to me this morning in my cab. Had a really young, snobby guy in the taxi, first year at university, I guess. He was pretty wasted and fairly nasty. Got to his parents' house in a decent area of town, and he had no money on him, so nipped inside to get some. Back and forward various times, still no money, all the time giving me a whole bunch of verbal abuse. Finally, he coughed up just over half the fare. "That'll have to do for you," he said. "You can call the police if you want, but I doubt they'd waste their time on chasing up a few extra pounds in a well-to-do middle-class area such as this. Go on, toddle on then." He added, motioning for me to leave. And I did. As I drove away, he stood triumphantly in his doorway, a broad smile on his face and his middle finger extended proudly in my direction, completely oblivious to the fact that minutes earlier he had handed his iPhone over as collateral. You can occasionally feel bad for some of these other criminals if they're resorting to their poorly orchestrated crimes out of desperation rather than a need to be a gangster, but these rich jerks who just feel entitled to other people's time without paying the proper due? Screw them. I hope you keep losing phones until you inherit a sense of decency, dude. I work part-time in a grocery store that's robbed all of the gosh darn time. Like seriously, once or twice every month. It's got to the point where now I just laugh every time I arrive at work to see the store has been broken into again. One particular night, just before we were beginning to close, a brazen robber runs into the store who appears to be no older than 20 with a cricket bat and nervously demands the money from the register. The clerk obeys and gives the man just under $200. The reward hardly seems proportional to the potential ramifications. At this point, the customers at the front end are backing away and the man attempts to make an escape. As he breaks for the door, while I'm standing in an adjacent aisle where the soup pleasantly happened to be shelved, I grabbed a big old can of tomato soup and gave it a friendly toss in the vicinity of his face. K.O. Slam dunk, hole in one. He takes a comical fall into the flower display in a glorious explosion of flowers and water. Then, every male customer jumps on the jerk and pins him down until the cops arrive. In short, I threw a can of soup at a robber and became a superhero. So I worked at a restaurant a few years back. I used to work behind the bar every once in a while. This guy was up there buying drink after drink, probably got his tab up to about $65. I remember the guy getting up. I figured he was going to the bathroom or something, but he just never came back. About an hour or so after that, a busboy found a wallet on the ground right under the seat he was sitting at. I take out the license to see if it was the guy, and it was. I saw a credit card in there and I charged it. He still hasn't returned for the wallet. When did you have to look after an absolute demon child? I babysat all through junior high and high school to make my spending money. The worst was a referral for the friends of a family that I babysat for all the time. This new family had 2 twin boys who were 8 and a little boy who was just starting her toilet training. The kids were very nice during the introductions, but it soon turned out they were hyper as heck as soon as their parents left. The boys whooped and hollered and chased each other through the house. I convinced them to play Legos or whatever in their room to keep them quiet because I had to deal with the little girl who needed to potty. She kept trying to go number 2 in her little training potty, but it wasn't happening. Then I heard the boys screaming at the top of their lungs, so I left her on her potty to find out why the boys were freaking out. The boys' bedroom had 2 single beds. Each boy was standing on his bed, peeing at the other one like they were having a pee-pee duel. They got urine everywhere, on the walls, the carpets, the sheets, and of course, all over each other. So I was ticked off at these kids and told them to change their clothes and strip the sheets. They just keep laughing at me and make me chase them around the house like it's a funny game to be soaked in pee. Meanwhile, the little girl, who wasn't wearing any pants or undies, drags her potty into the kitchen, singing at the top of her lungs about how she's pooped now and wants me to look. When one of the boys runs through the kitchen, he accidentally overturns the potty and stuff gets all over the linoleum. As much as I wanted to cry from utter frustration, I managed to hold my temper and calm them all down enough while I cleaned up as best as I could. Which is tough when it isn't your house and you have no idea where they keep all their cleaning supplies. When the parents finally came home, they didn't offer any apologies for how their kids behaved or any extra tip or anything like that. Needless to say, that was the first and last time I ever babysat for that family. I hope those gross little boys smelled wee-wee on their mattresses forever afterwards. And by the way, this was back before everyone had cell phones, so calling the parents to come home immediately wasn't really a good option. It would have involved calling a movie theater or whatever to track them down when I didn't even know what film they were seeing, or even know if they'd finished eating dinner out yet. Unless the kids were dying, I couldn't call the parents. I'm rather proud of my 14-year-old self for being a trooper and sticking it out rather than just giving up. Plus, it was pee and poop. I'd changed diapers and cleaned up after pets before. I got the sense when they hired me that they had a really hard time finding a permanent sitter. They hoped I could be on a regular schedule for them like I had with their friends. That should have been a red flag. They called me a few times after that night, but I always told them I was booked. I should have been honest about the reason why, but I didn't want them to badmouth me to everyone else in the neighborhood. Parents never want to hear their kids are anything but perfect angels. Haha, well, as gross as that sounds, I do wonder if these kids were really that bad all the time or if the acting out was a thing because the sitter was there. But yeah, the parents probably owed you an apology at the very least. The little girl didn't seem that bad. I think most of her antics can just really be put down to her being very young. I babysat one who climbed out of his bedroom onto the roof of his house and started the house on fire. That kid was a demon. He was 9 at the time. I called the fire department and got all 3 kids out of the house. Luckily, the fire station was a few blocks away, so they were there and put it out before it really got going. It was just smoldering. I was about 16 at the time, and I was very much in demand as a babysitter. I was also no nonsense, which I made clear to the parents. I was given permission to give the kids a whack on the bum if I needed to. This was the 60s, of course. But this particular kid was beyond even that. I lived on the block 4 houses down with my parents and 8 siblings. I continued to sit for them because they paid me a lot of money, especially after that, and they couldn't get anyone else to do it for some reason. They eventually moved to a mansion in a very wealthy neighborhood because the dad was made VP of the company he worked for, and they still drove about 10 miles each way to get me to watch their kids. I'm still in touch with his sister who lives in Atlanta. I always thought he'd end up in prison, but surprisingly, he's a fireman. I'm not technically a babysitter, but for a few months I had to babysit my husband's nieces and nephews. Those kids are awful. Their parents neglect them, and it shows. Here's a few highlights. I rescued a 2-week-old kitten, nursed him back to health, and adopted him. One day while I was doing dishes, the 2 youngest took him outside and tried to drown him in the above-ground pool. Twice. He survived. My in-laws' house was also filthy and roach-infested. While one of the kids was eating dinner, a roach apparently crawled across his plate and he started hysterically crying. I went to calm him down, and one of the others ran into the kitchen, opened every spice she could get her hands on, and dumped them all over the place. I decide I have to keep the 2 smaller ones with me at all times due to their antics. I put them on the kitchen counter to help me cook, and they actually start behaving, and I thought I'd found a successful method in handling them. I was wrong. One asks me a question while the other one takes out glasses from the cupboard and starts smashing them on the ground. I go to stop her, and then the other one starts smashing plates. The 2 oldest were sisters, and they hated each other. They got into a fight over the TV, it could have been the Xbox, I can't remember, and then the older one started chasing after the older sister, and eventually smashes the younger sister's fingers in the bathroom door. While that sister is crying, the older one is laughing maniacally the whole time. And that's just a few stories. There are others that make me so grateful to have moved away from all of them. I used to babysit the 2 boys of a family while their parents went out at once every few weeks to get some alone time. I'd looked after them before, and they were usually well-behaved and listened very well. This family had a few cats, and they'd climb all sorts of odd places, such as in sinks, bookshelves, cupboards, stuff like that. Well, this one night, I guess they'd left the dryer door open, and when one of the kids went downstairs to get his ball hockey gear, I guess he closed the door on the cat and started the dryer. I was already outside waiting at this point, so I heard nothing about this until we came back inside and I noticed a dryer was on. I asked the kids why it was on, and they said their mum was doing laundry. I knew for a fact it was turned off when after the parents left, so I went to investigate it and opened it to a completely burned and mangled cat that was essentially twisted like a pretzel. I told the parents what had happened and that their kid was a psychopath and needs help now because he's clearly not right in the head. Never babysat anyone's kids ever again. The parents were in shock. They didn't blame me or get mad, just shocked that one of their kids murdered their cat like that. It still makes me uncomfortable to think about him. Maybe this following story is why I'm scared to have little boys. I babysat for a few families on my street as a preteen. Word of mouth spread, and a family maybe 6 streets away asked me to watch 3 kids. 3 kids seemed like a lot for not knowing them, but they said they'd only be gone for a few hours. The parents leave, and the kids turn into demon spawn. 2 little boys and 1 youngest child girl. They tormented her until she was literally hiding and clinging to my legs and clothes. I turned on a movie and they were okay for like 1 minute. Then one boy gets up and pulls his pants down and literally just starts whittling in the middle of the living room. He was totally potty trained too, he was like 6. I freaked out and started to clean it up and sent the boy to his room. The other brother followed him, as they shared a room, and just sat in there with him. The girl snuck downstairs through all of this and, unbeknownst to me, starts making an F5 grade mess. After I clean the pee, I go to get them out of the boy's room. Surprise, the door is closed. Oh, and apparently locked. The one boy is only like 3 and is crying because he can't open it and his brother won't let him out. The older boy is defiant and just screaming at me, "No, I'm not opening it. You're not my mom. I want my mommy." We had a standoff for a few minutes before I realized the girl was gone. Well, I wasn't getting the boys out, so I went to get the phone and called the parents while I tried to find the girl. She had pulled out all of her fricking toys and they were everywhere, and I couldn't find her because she was in like a pillow pile somewhere. I don't really have an ending to the story, but needless to say, I was pretty much in tears by the time they came home. One of them drove me back and kept apologizing and hoped that I'd still give them another chance. That didn't happen. Also, this was probably like 15 years ago now. I was maybe 14 tops at the time. I didn't have the mental capacity to know what to do or how to handle any of this. And yeah, I was paid maybe $5 to $7 an hour. It was awful and scarred me from babysitting for a while. What is it with the small boys in these stories and just letting their bladders loose the second their parents are gone? Like, I was obsessed with farts at that age, but I had no interest in covering the place I lived in with pee-pee. Just like the first story. At least these parents apologized. I am a full-time nanny and have been for the past 5 years, but in childcare for the past 12. I'm primarily a nanny of multiples ranging from twins to quadruplets. Now, with that being said, you'd think I'd run across a handful of demon children, which I have, but dear lord, it's the parents that are the demons on more than one occasion. The one in particular that comes to mind saying this, I started with a morning family that I found through care.com after my regular family shortened my hours to afternoons only. When I first interviewed, the mum was notably odd, very in touch with emotions, and very particular about food. She stated that she wanted me from 7 to 12, Monday through Friday, for her 5-year-old son and 3-year-old son while she either ran errands or worked from home. Not too weird too far, but then she asked me what my parenting style was. I told her that my style was whatever hers was. I'm perfectly fine altering my nannying style to fit each individual family's needs. She told me she was wanting the answer of what I was going to do when I was a parent, not in nannying. I told her my philosophy: be kind, be consistent, timeouts for bad behavior, stuff like that. She then told me hers. We don't tell our children no, we don't take their toys away, we don't do timeouts, and we don't spank. Okay, I agree with that last one at least. So to say the least, I was confused about how the heck they run their household. Pretty much, she believed that each child had this emotional backpack where they store their feelings, and they need to express them constantly. She also mentioned to me that both of her children sleep in her bed. All well and good, but here's how her children acted with it once I was hired. I asked the 3-year-old, still in diapers, to lay down so I could change him. He refused, so I gave him a warning that I was going to pick him up and lay him down to change him. He then ran off to his mother, screaming and crying. I told her why he was crying, and this is what she had said. "Did Brittany do something to upset you? You just go ahead and cry, I'll hold you." Then once he was done with his tantrum, she said, "I'm so proud of you for getting all of those big feelings out." No, your child threw a tantrum because he didn't want his butt changed. He doesn't need praise for that. The 5-year-old was very independent, very smart, and very OCD. At one point, his brother and I were coloring. Now, as normal 3-year-olds do, he was scribbling. His brother came in and started taunting his brother and telling him he was doing everything wrong. I told the older brother, "Your brother is trying to express his creativity. Let's encourage him rather than criticize him." The 5-year-old bursts into tears and runs to his mother, and he has the biggest wail about this, to which the mother responds basically the same way she did about the kid needing his nappy changed. The 5-year-old was mad at his mother one time because she told him to get dressed. He came up, hit her across the face while screaming, and she just let him. She kept praising him for getting his big feelings out. He's still hitting her, so she takes him to the shower, turns the water on both of them, fully clothed by the way, and tries to get him to calm down. So, besides those incidents, I can't get either child to do anything, especially with the mother around. After a few weeks, she introduced me to more rules and more expectations. She wanted me to have a schedule with them and wanted me to do some homeschooling. No big deal, I get it. But then anytime I told them it was for blah blah blah, she'd swoop in and say they could just play instead. Like the children just woke up that morning and I told them to brush their teeth. They said they wanted to play, and the mum negotiated with them by asking them if that's what they thought they felt they needed to do. Like, no matter what I or the mother said it was time to do, as long as the kid felt like he didn't need to do said thing, then he didn't need to do so. At one point, even, the mum and I took the kids to the library. I told her we needed to finish up soon because I needed to get going to my other job. We got to the car, and because the 5-year-old didn't feel like getting in the car, she let him stand outside for 25 minutes before he felt like getting in the car, resulting in me being late for my next job. She was also really strange with food too. She was one of those people who legitimately treated organic food as a religion. These were her own words, by the way. She had a number system for food, 1 to 5. The only thing listed as number 1, as in completely healthy, was a vitamin called chuanprash. Even fruits and vegetables were labeled as 2. Salads and healthy food? 3. Bread? 4. And anything sweet was number 5. The thing is, she classified anything that wasn't 1 or 2 to be unhealthy. So these children thought a simple salad or anything normal was bad for them, so they wouldn't eat it. And anytime they did have any sweets, they'd go frickin' nuts over wanting more because she deprived them of everything. They'd have full-day tantrums because of it. And my last note is that she didn't allow any electronics in the bedroom, not even an alarm clock. So this meant I had to wait every single day in the cold, ringing the doorbell constantly, sometimes up to 45 minutes, for them to come answer the door. Needless to say, I quit within 2 months. It was utterly ridiculous. At the end of it, she asked me to review her family and children. She asked me the pros and cons. She was very shocked to hear that the only pro I listed was that the children had a very good vocabulary. In short, despite nannying for many years, it's the parents that are always more demonic than the children. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My friend babysat a kid with Pika. Had to follow him around everywhere yelling, "No, don't eat that." Kind of like having a new puppy. Ended the night watching him chew on her flip-flop while it was on her foot. Kid threw an easy bake oven at me and then tried to lock me in a closet. This is way funnier than it should be. I'd say a bunch of the things we've read up to now could honestly be put down to bad parenting, having no boundaries up until the story, or the kids being young and curious, or just being wired differently. This thing with the easy bake might be the first thing I've read that seems to be legitimately malicious. Although the cat in the dryer might also qualify if we knew more about that kid. Not so much a nightmare, but it was an odd night. I was in my senior year of college and picked up an occasional babysitting gig from care.com. The family is well-to-do, awesome people in a hella good part of town, and the kids are between 8 and 12, so really I'm just there to make sure no one burns the nice house to the ground. With that being said, the younger one, who we'll call Adam, was definitely on the spectrum. I head over one night and the parents call Adam down. I notice he's just in his tighty-whities, which is how he slept, and he seems totally frickin' out of it. The parents ask him to tell me what had happened. When he's too incoherent to tell me, they finally blurt out that he had his tonsils taken out like 48 hours ago. Oh, okay, awesome. Thanks for the heads up, but I guess this is what I'm dealing with. So anyway, Adam goes back to bed and I don't hear anything out of him for like the next 5 hours because the little guy is riding high as frick on pain meds. I check up on him a few times. We're good, whatever. It's now about 10 or 11 at night and I hear him come down the stairs and he's holding a stuffed animal Bowser. I say, "Hey buddy, how you feeling?" Adam says nothing. "What you doing, Adam?" He silently walks into the kitchen. "Adam, do you want something to eat?" He opens the freezer in total silence still. "Why don't you let me help you, Adam?" To remind you, this kid is in nothing but his undies and holding a stuffed animal. He finally acknowledges my presence and looks me straight in the eyes and then gargles. "Bowser hungry." It still cracks me up thinking about it. In short, the kid is high as a kite, gets the munchies but can't communicate very well due to pain meds and recently removed tonsils. I had one main family I regularly babysat for after college, and they recommended me to a friend of theirs who had 2 girls. Both families were well off, but very different. Anyway, the second family's 2 girls were beyond spoiled. I mean reality TV show spoiled. The youngest, who was 5, would blood-curdle scream for a good 15 minutes running through his mansion house when it was time for bed. I always felt like a jerk calling the mother, but they didn't pay me enough to put up with that bullcrap. I'd have to set the girl up in the special room and rub her back while she fell asleep after she spoke to her mother. I sat for them 3 times and avoided their calls after that. I babysat 2 kids throughout the school year and multiple days in the summer when I was in high school. I was pretty much a 9-to-5 nanny when not in school. I really loved those kids, which is surprising, considering the first time I babysat them all day, it all went to hell. The older sibling was a boy in my cousin's grade, and the younger one a little girl. They were maybe 6 or 7 and 3 and 4 respectively at this point. I'd babysat once or twice before, but never a whole day by myself. I don't know what started the incident, but the kids began to fight. Before I could break it up, the little girl threw a heavy, pointy metal toy plane at her brother. It hit him right in the corner of his eye, barely missing his actual eyeball. He started gushing blood everywhere, all over his clothes, all over the expensive Disney Store Winnie the Pooh blanket his sister had been walking around with, all over the pristine white carpet. He freaks out and starts crying, asking me if he's dying. Hardcore, terrified kid sobs. I rush into action and usher him to the bathroom and get a cold washcloth. I had to coax his hands away from his face so I could see what I was dealing with, and eventually I get the blood wiped away and see it's a very small cut. I have him hold the cold washcloth to his eye and I work on calming him down. The bleeding stops, I get him into fresh PJs and send him to his bed to lie down for a few minutes since he'd worn himself out at that point. That's when I realized that I haven't seen his sister in about 10 to 15 minutes. I got sidetracked with the bleeding, panicking kid, and now I have no idea where the culprit is. I ran around inside the house and checked all of the doors and locks. Still locked, so I know she's at least inside. I'm fighting back tears and running around the house shouting her name, trying to find her. I go back to her brother's room, deciding that I need to get his help, and that's when I hear it. Little sniffles and quiet hiccups from behind his bedroom door. She was a small child and had hidden behind the door, fearing that she was in trouble and that I was going to whack her. I didn't, of course. So now I'm comforting her, but also telling her that hurting her brother and hiding from me isn't okay. I'm completely drained and wigged out at this point, so I have the kids go to the living room with me and sit them at opposite ends of the couch. I put on a kid's film and get to work cleaning up the blood from the carpet and floor. Then I sit at the kitchen table, open concept so I can see them, and quietly try to calm myself down so I don't throw up all over myself. I'm really proud I got the bloodstains out of the carpet, though. I had a 5-year-old pull out a pocket knife on me and demand I give him my Pokemon cards. Aha! That child attended the video game school of how to get what you want, I guess. Classic Elder Scrolls protagonist material right there. Also, I'm curious as to whether the knife was the property of that kid or not. I had a kid go to the bathroom, go number 2, run out with no pants, no wiping, grab my house key and throw it in said mess. When I fished it out, he sat on the couch rubbing his butt. I used every kind of soap on that key. When his parents got back, I waited to get paid. Then I explained things, pointing to the spot on the couch, and I left. I had a kid who was literally the embodiment of Cartman from South Park. He fried his pet rat and tried to eat it. I wasn't there when it happened, but when his parents told me, I made sure to never see that devil again. I was 14 years old and my mum's friend calls with an emergency. Her normal babysitter backed out on her last minute, so she asked if I could sit her 8-year-old son, who's quite far along the spectrum, for a few hours. Sure, I say, why not? So I get to the house and the kid wants to watch some cartoons. So we watch cartoons. Then he gets bored and wants to play hide and seek. I tell him to go hide and I'll come look for him soon. I continue to watch cartoons for 10 more minutes before I realize I should probably be looking for him. Now, I was on the bottom level, and they had one of those split-level houses where you walk in the front door and you can either go upstairs or downstairs. So I start walking up the stairs yelling, "Gregory, where are you?" You know, the usual. So I get to the foyer landing in the middle, and this kid slides out from the hallway to the top of the stairs, Tom Cruise risky business style, except he's completely in the buck, and he screams, "You scared my pants off!" Now, this kid is fairly large, weight and height-wise. This was also the first male member I'd ever seen. I was immediately scarred for life, called my mum, explained the situation and that I wasn't fit to babysit anymore. She came and took over and I walked home and sat in silence for a while. I have never babysat again since then. When did you verbally destroy someone you didn't know for their horrible behavior? So I went to Subway yesterday to get one of those delicious $5 footlongs. Upon arrival, I saw 3 girls, probably all about 17 or 18. The first 2 order, and the server asks the last girl what toppings she wants. She's on her phone, so she doesn't answer. The server asks her again, not being impatient or rude, just asks. And the girl snapped, "Can't you see I'm on the phone here? God, you're so rude. Just wait till I'm done." I was so offended and embarrassed for her server, so I couldn't help but say something to her. That was extremely rude. You came here to get a sub, don't yell at her for providing the service you asked for. Just get off your phone, order your toppings, and stop acting like a child. She looked at me with contempt and anger, but I think I intimidated her, so she didn't say anything back to me. The server looked at me, smiled, and mouthed the words, "Thank you." One of my customers where I used to work, this guy was being absurdly rude to me and my coworker. I'd already told him quite clearly that there was a line and he'd be waiting in it in the order he came in. This was a high-end store at Christmas time, so the sense of entitlement is a little bit too common. He called my manager an idiot after having to re-ring something. Another customer behind him, and half his size, taps him on the shoulder and says loudly, "Would you mind shutting the frick up and letting these people do their jobs? You're seriously teeing us all off." The bigger guy threatens him, and the smaller guy goes, "If you were as tough as you like to think you are, you wouldn't have to be such a prick. Just shut the frick up." I magically found a 50% off coupon for my new favorite person. My buddy and I were at a movie, and these guys who were just talking about how they'd got out of basic training were bashing the movie and laughing, making rude comments, stuff like that. Well, my buddy tells them to pipe the frick down, and they flip him off, but they do quiet down. After the movie, we're at the front of the pack, right behind the 6 or 7 guys who were being rude, and my buddy says, "That was really rude to everyone, how are you behaving?" And one of them, the loudest, whips out his military ID and says, "Yeah, well I'm a fricking Marine and I fight for your freedoms, idiot." My buddy, who just happens to be an officer, whips out his ID and says, "And I'm a Marine officer, and just because you have the honor of wearing a uniform, it doesn't give you the right to be a crap-spewing child." Then he made them stand at attention right at the door of the movie theater and apologized to every patron exiting. My money is on those idiots never actually seeing any action and yet busting their entitlement out on everyone they see anyway. Some people really do just sign up for the credit and status rather than out of a drive to do anything good. I used to work in the toy department of a retail store. The Leapfrog laptop had just come out and they were really expensive. So I was straightening shelves and I noticed a kid just wailing away on one of these laptops. Their mum is nowhere to be found. I approached the kid and asked him nicely, "Is that how you play with your toys at home?" The kid gave me a sheepish, "No," and placed it back on the shelf. I was feeling pretty good about myself at that point when the kid's mum came out of nowhere and very rudely told me that I had no right to speak to her child that way. I calmly looked this poor excuse for a mother in the eye and said, "Ma'am, your son was about to break a $150 toy. Our store has a you break it, you buy it policy. If you would like me to give it back to him so he can continue hitting it, I'd be happy to ring you up at my register for the damages." She then proceeded to give me an eat crap and die look, grabbed her son, and stalked off. In college, my friends and I were sitting at a table, and behind us was a kid sitting by himself. I'll admit, he looked a little bit like a cliché D-bag. Popped collar, gelled hair, super tan, all the stuff. A group of kids in the same area had been laughing and talking loudly about his general fashion sense for a while now, though. Eventually, one of the girls got up, walked over, and proclaimed loudly, "I'm sorry, but I have to help you out because you look like a total—" She used a slur for a gay person. Then she pulled his collar down. The kid sat there in disbelief as she walked away and his eyes started welling up. I was infuriated and walked over to her table. In the most conversational tone I could muster, I said, "Oh hey, do you know that guy?" She said she didn't, and then the scolding began. "So you just thought it would be appropriate to demean a complete stranger in public to look like a frickin' cool kid in front of all of your friends. I hope you feel better and that you all got a good laugh at his expense. Maybe next time you can pause to reflect before you're a total butthole." I then walked over to the table and invited the kid to sit with me and my friends. Turns out he was gay, had just transferred to the college, and didn't know anyone. I used to work at McDonald's when I was in high school, so I sympathize with other teenage fast food workers. A while ago, I was in the local McDonald's where I used to work, and it was apparent that it was the cashier's first day working there, but he seemed to be doing okay. He entered something wrong, though, and asked his manager to fix it, and the manager came over and started tearing into him in front of all the customers, calling him a fricking idiot and an inbred monkey, and so on and so forth. After I received my order at the counter, I asked the manager to come over and told him, "Please do not talk to that cashier that way ever again. Just because you're a day shift manager at a McDonald's, it doesn't make you a superior human being, and it gives you no right to treat others, especially your employees, like dirt." After I sat down, the other manager came over and brought me some apple pies and thanked me for standing up to that guy. Apparently he acted that way towards everyone. Back in college, there was a mentally challenged guy who worked in the dorm dining hall. He obviously had some problems, but was with it enough to hold down the job, remember certain students, carry on conversations, stuff like that. One day I was behind some girls in line who were standing right in front of him talking about how they didn't like being served by a, quote, retard, and so on and so forth. I said, "He has ears and he can hear you. He's a person just like the rest of us and you shouldn't treat people like that." They called me the B-word and walked away. I'm a student in a culinary arts program. We rotate through stations and run a full operation-sized cafeteria on the university campus. One of the stations, desserts, requires that you serve and plate in front of the customer. I was helping this one woman, and another guy who comes in every day and is the worst customer I've ever dealt with, budged in front of her and reached for the dessert that I was still plating. The customer says loudly, "Excuse me, that's mine. She's not done and you can wait and not be so rude. You're unbelievable." He walked away with an unhappy, childish look on his face. She looked at me and said, "Sorry, I can't stand rude people." I couldn't have been more grateful. In short, had a customer stand up for me against a really rude regular. I'm a pretty mellow guy who travels for a living. I don't really let the small things get to me. A couple of years ago, I was on a flight that was already running 30 minutes late. I was really thinking to myself that the connection was going to be tight, most likely involving running or a brisk walk for a mile or so through ATL. I was one of the last to board the plane, and I had to check my bag since there was no more room. The 4 or 5 people behind did the same thing. What are you going to do? Well, I worked my way down the aisle, and there was a guy there asking people to shift their bags or move stuff that definitely wasn't moving. He was trying to get his oversized bag to fit, and there was just no place for it. He called for the flight attendant, who walked up and says, "Sir, we're out of room. We'll have to check your bag." Well, that was it for him. He went off on her, started yelling, "This airline sucks. I'm a million-mile member. I want your employee number and name," so on and so forth. At that point, I pretty much mentally snapped. I felt horrible for the flight attendant who was just doing her job, and this guy spent 5 minutes making a butthead out of himself and burning up time that we could have been airborne in. People were gawking, looking away, cringing, and overall just hoping he'd stop so that they could move on. I just yelled, "Shut up! Shut the hell up!" At this point, I was shaking with anger, and then I went off. "Take your bag to the front of the plane, check it, and stop with this insanity. You are what is wrong with air travel. Your sense of entitlement makes me want to puke. If you're a million-mile flyer, you know the rules of flying. You know how this works. Why punish everyone else on this flight? You've insulted this lovely flight attendant, and you've made everyone on this plane uncomfortable with your little show, and I'm now another 5 minutes late for my connection. I want you and your little Napoleon complex issues," he was about 5'5", "to shut up and sit down. Do we have a problem?" He started spluttering and looking all flustered, but didn't say a single word. Somebody at the back of the plane started clapping, and soon the whole cabin was applauding me. I just sat down and waited while everyone clapped, and this guy took a long walk of shame to the front of the plane and back. The flight attendant thanked me, and so did everyone else. I didn't mean to do it, but I just can't stand people like that. The best part was I had free drinks for the flight. The flight attendant gave me a stack of free drink cards for my next couple of flights, and one of the passengers gave me a voucher for free Wi-Fi that he'd won. It was very satisfying. This one is straining the edge of plausibility a little bit for the narrator, but I do hope that it happened. In my experience, entitled people generally feel completely justified and have no problem arguing that they should be given special treatment for some reason or other, if they don't resort to tough guy crap. But it's not impossible, and it's the kind of thing people would clap for, so here's hoping. I have worked at Chili's for about 5 years now. There have been so many experiences with rude people that I've lost count, but this was the worst one by far. I'm waiting tables about this time of year, graduation time, and I've got a party of 25 call ahead at about 7, and they say they'll be arriving in 30 minutes. We set the table up for them and we're anticipating their arrival. They actually ended up showing up about an hour and a half later than they said they would. We'd since broken up the big table and set other smaller parties there. They arrived and were angry that their table wasn't ready for them, and the really soft-spoken, sweet host that was working that night simply explained to them that they thought they'd chosen somewhere else to go since they hadn't come sooner. The lady that was speaking to the host immediately burst out saying that we should have known they were still coming, and that she knew Chili's was a terrible idea and that we're all awful at our jobs. The host, almost in tears, says that she'll set up another table for them in a closed section and that I'll be taking care of them. I should also mention these same people come in all the time. They're rude to everyone and never tip and always complain so that they can get free food. When I wait on large parties by myself, I always start everyone out with a water just because it takes a little bit to get everyone's drink order and get it out to them, and I figure it's better at least to have some water available while you're waiting. As soon as we get them settled in, several of them start complaining that they don't want water, and I was rude to not offer them a different option. I simply explained to them that I'll be bringing them whatever they'd like and that the water was just to hold them for the time being. They proceed to tell me that I'm an idiot and tell me to get this mess out of my face, referring to the water. Most of them start ordering strawberry lemonade. I make all of the drinks and bring them out to them. People then start to complain that this is really nasty. They tell me it doesn't taste anything like it did last time, and I tell them that we make it by measurement every time. But I'd be glad to make a new batch for them. I go and pour out what we had and make another batch of the strawberry lemonade and take it out to them again. And they again complain that it's nasty. I offer to get them something else and they just say, "We want a waiter that isn't an idiot and knows how to make strawberry lemonade." I go get the manager to explain that we make it the same way every time, and they roll their eyes and tell the manager that I was being rude to them. Fast forward to when they're eating their meal, they start being really rude to me again. They started pouring their drinks out on the floor on purpose, throwing food, and insulting me right in front of my face. I had a couple of other tables that complained that this huge party is being extremely loud, which they were. I went over and asked if they minded being a little quieter, as it was disturbing the other tables in the restaurant. One kid then yells, "Oh, you think I'm too loud, punk?" And they all start being even louder than before, and some tables got up and left. That was the final straw. I yelled over them and told them they're no longer welcome at our restaurant. That shut them up. One kid told me that I couldn't do that, and I said, "When you start causing our other good-paying customers to leave, I can do what I want. Now get out." They had the nerve to ask for boxes for their food, which they hadn't touched because they were too busy being loud. I told them that I could care less if they wanted their food and that they needed to leave. My manager and I stood at the door smiling, watching them all walk out. One girl told me I ruined her graduation party. I informed her that she had no class and got what she deserved. A few of them stayed and talked to my manager, begging him to allow them back because it was their favorite place to eat. He told them that they cost the company money when they came in and that they were never welcome back. I haven't seen them since. 100% improvement. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My dad was driving around with his terminally ill friend. They needed to go to a pharmacy, and seeing as how my dad's friend gets short of breath easily, they were hoping for a handicap spot. Unfortunately, none were vacant, so they had to park farther away. A squat, muscular man comes walking out of the pharmacy and starts to open the door of his Ford F-150 parked in a handicap spot that he clearly didn't need to be in, nor did he have a sticker. My friend's dad called out to him as he was getting in, "Excuse me? Yeah? Is your handicap physical or mental?" The guy's face went white as a ghost and he quickly got into his truck and pulled away. I was at the grocery store on my lunch break. This older woman, who had some obvious mental and emotional problems, was walking up to a checkout. She went to take her salad out and it opened up and just went everywhere. So she starts crying and saying how she can't afford to buy another salad and apologizing for the mess. A clerk and I went over and started helping her. The clerk tells her it happens all the time and that they won't charge her, but the woman was still visibly upset and continued apologizing and crying. Then I hear two 40 to 45-year-old women, with their hair all done up, expensive clothes, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, giggling and having little laughing outbursts every time the old lady says something. I was appalled, but whatever. To my amazement, they start openly mocking her loud enough that we could all hear and flat out laughing at her. At this point, I stood up, grabbed my basket, walked over near them and quietly said, "Come on, quit it." They both stop laughing and get beet red with anger. One of them then says, "Excuse me, who the frick are you?" I calmly replied, "It takes a lot of time for me to get mad. She's obviously upset, she can hear you over here, and it's embarrassing for you and her." That's when they both lose it, saying, "Who the frick are you? Who the frick do you think you are? Don't ever talk to me like that," etc. To which I replied, "Listen, I know you're both really unhappy because you married a man for money and now he's cheating on you with much younger women, and your kids probably don't respect or like you because you're obviously crappy people, but you don't have to be mean to strangers. If you want to laugh, whatever, but don't start mocking people. Try to contain yourselves and act like the adults you've never had to become." They were shocked. It was really funny. They said, "We're not paying for this," and just walked out, leaving their food behind. Then the checkout clerk just started laughing, and the guy behind me went, "Frick yeah." I kinda think I did a bit of an overkill, but I was really shocked at how mean they were being. This one I find easier to believe because these people actually refused to believe they were wrong or to learn anything. And yes, it was a bit of an overkill, but honestly, if you're going to laugh openly at a struggling person that way, then you deserve anything that's coming to you. Went to see the Wolverine movie in a really big theater. About halfway up the row of seats, it had an aisle that cut across horizontally from one side of the theater to the other. Some butthead father was there with a toddler, and he let that kid run back and forth across the aisle, squealing the whole time. I put up with it for about 30 minutes, and then finally went down to the father and said, "Do you realize the entire theater can hear your child and that it's ruining the movie for the rest of us? Please make him be quiet." The father stared at me in complete shock as if the concept had never crossed his mind. He left immediately with his kid. Several people around me said thank you as I sat down. One time I was at a show in Philly. It was in between bands, and everyone was milling around outside the venue. As I was standing talking to some friends, I noticed 5 or 6 wannabe hardcore kids harassing this homeless guy. They were kind of pushing him around, forcing him to take pictures with them and talking down to him. Eventually, the guy slumps down on a wall, pulling his knees up and starts crying as these guys are degrading him more and more. One of them shoves his camera phone in the guy's face, saying he's going to make him famous on YouTube. At this point, I've seen and heard enough and I just lose it. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I remember flipping on these guys for about 5 minutes, along the lines of how that guy has nothing and you have everything compared to him, yet you're worthless. How disgusting what they were doing was, how sad and pathetic they were. I didn't care that it was 5 or 6 guys who could probably together beat my face in. I knew there was no threat towards the end of my tirade when they were all staring at the ground, red in the face, clearly ashamed of what they did. As my verbal berating ended, I was greeted to applause from everywhere. I helped the old guy up and took him to Wawa and bought him some dinner. He was weeping on the way there, thanking me, saying he'd never had anyone stick up for him his entire life, and how I came out of nowhere to help him. It felt good, man. I was helping my grandparents run errands one day, and while my grandfather, who was injured during test fire in France during the war. He had stood up to get out of the store mechanized wheelchair so that he could use the ATM. Some 19-year-old thug walked up and sat down in it. I gave him 3 polite versions of, "He's using that," before he responded, "Chill out, I'll get up in a minute." I started to explain that I wanted the chair available in case he lost his balance or anything, then thought better of it, instead staring homeboy in the eyes with a deadpan, "Get up, mother fricker." To which the guy responded with a, "Who do you think you're talking to?" I told him, "I'm talking to you, mother fricker, get up now." He responded with, "Who you talking to?" again. Note that if the person isn't scared of you the first time you say it, it's just going to make you look dumb. At this point, he still hadn't gotten up, so I rushed the cart, fully intending to flip it over, and when homie saw that I was serious, he jumped up and started muttering about how I'd better hope he never saw me again. As a side note, my grandfather was 91 and looks just like Jimmy Carter, except maybe a little more unassuming, and I don't think I've ever seen him prouder than he was at that moment. In college, for a Spanish class I was taking, I had the opportunity to see a foreign film for extra credit. I had to take notes during the film, so I could write a brief summary of the movie to turn into my Spanish professor. The movie was playing in one of our big lecture halls by the Foreign Film Club at my school, so there were a lot of students there watching. I get to my seat, settle in, and start watching the movie. About 10 minutes in, 2 girls enter the hall and proceed to make a lot of noise like nothing is going on at all. They take their seats in my same row, but on the other side of the aisle. They continue talking for the next 10 to 15 minutes loudly while the movie is playing, not giving any Fs. I can tell people around me are annoyed with subtle ahem and groans and multiple head turns to look at the girls, but no one really does anything and the girls keep talking. Finally, I've had it. I get up and walk over to the girls and ask them in the most polite voice I could muster, as I was very annoyed, "Please excuse me, ladies, for interrupting your conversation. Would you mind shutting the frick up so the rest of us can watch the film?" I just stood there and they got very angry and left. The entire lecture hall applauded and the movie went on. There were no more interruptions and I left that place feeling 10 feet tall. It was well worth the 25 extra credit points. I once told off a customer in a retail store for being rude and mean. She had made one of my staff cry, she was so awful. The general gist of what I said was, "Do you feel better about yourself after you made this 17-year-old girl cry? Was it really necessary? Until you learn to treat others with respect, I don't want to see you in my store again. Leave before I call security." It's shocking how rude people are, and not just the younger generation. When I was working at Target in high school, I dealt with extremely rude people all the time. Usually I'd just give them the benefit of the doubt and assume they were having a bad day or something, but I've had things thrown at me while I was sitting at the customer service desk, being called a racist, screamed at, you name it. It's awful. I feel for anyone working in that environment. I went off on someone who pushed their shopping cart towards the little corrals, but it ended up going off course and hitting a parked car. They didn't bother to look or put the cart away properly. I also went off on someone who slammed their car door into the parked car next to them, several times, because apparently they parked too close. The lady doing the door slamming was parked over the line, and the vandalized car was dead center of the spot. I took down her license plate number, went into the store, found the owner of the other car, and let them know. What was the biggest fail a new driver has made on their driving test? I was finishing my test, and a man when I went in was yelling at the proctor. Apparently it was unfair that his daughter failed since she can't read English, so she didn't understand what a stop sign meant. Even if you can't read, you should still fricking know what a red octagon on a stick means. I had a driving class in high school that went out in groups to drive. One kid didn't know how to turn off a turn signal. He didn't know that you can flick it off with your hand. After he made the turn, the signal was still on, so he began wildly jerking the wheel left and right, trying to make it stop. My brother taking his driving test. He put his hand on the passenger headrest to brace to look backwards while reversing, and his hand slipped off the rest and slapped the bejesus out of the driving instructor, breaking his glasses and leaving a perfect red handprint on his cheek. He still passed! One of my driving instructor's other students, a 16-year-old girl who went into labor during the driving test, and the examiner had to drive her to the hospital. My driving instructor told me about a previous student who drove directly over a very large mound of grass kind of roundabout. Apparently the examiner wouldn't even let them drive back to the test center, took over the driving for them. My ex failed after the examiner said, "Straight over the roundabout." Well, she drove onto the roundabout and was also failed for not indicating to oncoming traffic when she left the roundabout. My dad was an examiner for a while. Once a girl froze during the test and stopped on railroad tracks, and a train was coming. Not real fast, but fast enough that it might not be able to stop. She wouldn't hit the accelerator as she was frozen in fear, especially after the train blew its horn right into the window. My dad had to put his foot on her side and hit the gas to get off the tracks. And this is one of the reasons why in Germany, the cars for the driving instructors have a gas and brake pedal on the passenger side as well. If the instructor hits one of those during the test, a buzzer goes off, so the examiner in the back knows that the instructor had to intervene. Needless to say, this is an instant fail. Honestly, I thought this system was standard all over the world. Also, we're really just not that much better than those goats that freeze when they hear loud noises, are we? Maybe it works in nature, but it's a real evolutionary flaw in our modern world that we decide to lie perfectly still in exactly the path of this thing that will definitely kill us. My tester told me something I'll never forget. He was driving with a girl and testing her. Here in Arizona, and probably everywhere in the US, the examiner isn't allowed to say anything that isn't a direction, like turn left. Of course, this doesn't work if the driver is a little slow. During the test, she pulls up to a stop sign. She's the first one there, but another car pulls up to the left. She waves them on. Not entirely wrong, but she should have gone first. Not a huge deal, though. Then it happens again. Mind you, she hasn't moved through the intersection. Rather, another car has approached, stopped, and been waved on. There are now 1 or 2 cars behind her. Eventually, there's a huge backup of honking traffic and a small trickle of cars crossing through the intersection in front of her. She finally turns to the instructor and says, "Why are they all mad at me? I have a red light." And that's the story of how a small point deduction failed someone's driving test. Not the examiner, but I was involved. I was driving my regular vehicle into the parking lot of a CDL-only driver facility to renew my CDL. As I was making a right into the parking lot from the public road, a semi-tractor trailer comes flying out of the lot into my right-of-way. I avoid by pulling off onto the grass. The trailer continues onto the road but crosses directly across into the parking lot opposite. I get off the grass, park properly, grab my things and walk into the facility. I was angry, but I wasn't hit, so I wasn't going to go after the guy and cause a fight. About 3 minutes later, a driver examiner walks in screaming about this idiot who's never getting his Class A as long as she lives, and whoever bought him here better not ever let him try again, and needs to go across the street to collect the vehicle and the sorry excuse for a driver. So yeah, I nearly got taken out by a newbie truck driver. I wonder if he ever did pass or if she was truly able to permaban him. Not me, but my driving instructor said a student failed when they forgot to put the car in drive. Did pretty much everything else right, but they were pressing on the gas and were confused as to why they weren't moving. I actually forgot to turn the car on when I first went for my test. I was using my instructor's car and he'd always have it on already when I drove it, so I wasn't prepared, clearly. I still passed, though. I was a new driver. At the time, I read about a new law where drivers could run a stop sign if the driver could see that the intersection was clear. This was considered a rolling stop. I went to my test, drove a stick fluently, rolled through a 4-way stop, and the instructor freaked out. That was a 4-way stop. Well, there's a new law to save gas when you're allowed to roll through a stop if the intersection is clear. It was passed in October. It was clear, so I rolled through. Satisfied, the instructor scribbled something on his clipboard. I passed and went back to work. Told the guys that the dumb instructor didn't even know about the new rolling stop law. My colleagues looked aghast. That's not a law. They proposed it in October, and it got shot down. I can't believe he passed you. Whew! My cousin took a turn too fast in Lake Country and flipped the car completely upside down on his first test. Did he pass, or did he get a driver's permit for Australia? I was T-boned by a lady running a red, and I failed. I mean, if you can't complete the test, they can't exactly pass you, even if it's not your fault. There was a big panic and scrambling on the day of my road test. Apparently, a young woman completely blew past a stop sign and got T-boned by a school bus. The girl was hurt, but since it was the examiner's side, they were in a critical condition last I heard. Safe to say she instantly failed. I mean, if the instructor dies during the test, can you really fail? Technically, the only witness to your driving is dead. In college, I had a fraternity brother who was stopped by the police for suspected drunk driving. The driver got out of the car as the police officer approached the car. It's a big no-no in my state. The driver immediately fell to the ground and passed out. He was arrested and the car was impounded. The fraternity's faculty moderator was an attorney and professor. He represented the driver in court. He was acquitted because he had neither failed the sobriety test or breathalyzer, nor did he refuse to take it. This gem is from my examiner. Said the worst he's ever seen was a girl who thought it would be a good idea to try to outrun a train. He told her to stop, and she said no, she's fine. The barrier hit the top of her car and insta-failed after she bottomed out the suspension while speeding. On my test, I passed pretty easily, and when the instructor told me to pull over at the end of the course, she motioned towards a spot with a fire hydrant. Thinking it was a final gotcha, I said, "Well, there's a fire hydrant there, so I'll go to the next stop." She didn't care, it wasn't a test, but as soon as I parked 3 cars up, a presumably failing testee rear-ended the car I would have been behind at around 15 kilometers per hour. No one left in an ambulance, but the instructor in that car got out rubbing his neck and the car was pretty beat up. If I didn't think my examiner was tricking me, it would have been my car. I had a friend in high school who ran a red light during her exam. She thought it was a left-turn yield, and it was not. She laughed about it later and said the examiner was like, "Why did you do that?" In excess of 25 years ago, the RTA office car park in Albury, New South Wales was where you started your test. There was a stop sign and a solid white line at the exit from the car park. Australian rules make this a compulsory stop. Neophytes would roll through it and thus fail before the front wheels even hit the road. Does an examiner mistake count? Local story, the examiners used to tap the pens on the dashboard to signify when it was time for the emergency stop part of the test. This practice was stopped when, apparently, an examiner absent-mindedly tapped his pen on his clipboard towards the end of one unfortunate soul's test, who misinterpreted this as another emergency stop command. The pen went through the examiner's eye. Where I live, a student drove into the river with her instructor, and both women died. I still don't understand how this could have happened. Well, did she pass? Well, yes and no. Well, the narrator's going to hell for laughing at that last bit, but I'd wager that a few of you others are as well, so I guess I'll see you there. I was at the DMV a few days ago when I overheard a girl crying her eyes out. Apparently there was a pothole in the middle of the road and the examiner told her to go around it using the bike lane since there was no middle lane. She proceeded to do so, but drove the rest of the driving test in the bike lane. She was telling her parents it wasn't even her fault because the lady told her to drive in the bike lane. My cousin finished his driving test by driving into the side of the DMV itself, leaving a large hole in the wall. He asked his instructor if he would have passed if he didn't hit the wall, and the instructor just shook his head and failed him. I passed the first time, 100%, although when driving back into the car park of the transport department, I pulled in a little wonkily, so I said, "Oh, I'll fix that for you," reversed back to straighten up, and another car had started to pull out directly behind me, not noticing me, I guess. They were about to hit my car, so I stressed out and put the car into drive to move forward quickly. A little too quickly. I launched my car over the car space barrier thing. I wanted to cry then and there, and he just said, "Okay, I'll meet you inside." I parked the car and sat there for a good minute, knowing that must have made me fail. As I walked inside, I saw all of the instructors standing together with him, and they were all laughing at me. I passed, though, so I was happy to laugh along, whilst dying inside. Now I have a real fear of hitting those mini concrete barriers when I park. I almost hit a woman with a stroller during my test. There was a shadow from a building covering her and the stroller, and sunlight everywhere else. The examiner was surprised and didn't see her herself, so I passed. Don't ask me how, but my friend drove up an exit ramp. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My brother looped his bike on his motorcycle test. He got nervous and gave it way too much throttle and dumped the clutch at the same time. The bike just started rotating out from under him. I'm not an examiner, but damn, it was funny to watch. I passed my third time. I have no idea how good I did, though. The Korean woman who tested me looked pretty tired, put her sunglasses down, told me about 2 instructions, and then promptly began to doze off during the test. At one point she said, "You know where to go." Entirely skipped the freeway portion of my test. I remember pulling in, and I said, "Okay, we're here," and she softly muttered, "Thank God." 100% pass, no mistakes. I guarantee she didn't see a single second of my driving. One of my friends made a pretty brutal mistake. We live in Wisconsin, and she took the test on a day where there was a bit of snow. Started the road portion of the test, pulling up to a red light with a pedestrian crossing in the crosswalk. My friend started braking way too late. When she hit the brakes, the wheels just locked up and she slid into the pedestrian, knocking them up onto her hood and breaking the pedestrian's leg. She failed 4 times more after that, but now just uses the road like everyone else. I refuse to ever ride in her car. Not awful, but I was definitely embarrassed the whole time. I was nervous on my first test, and when they said, "Start the car and pull onto the road," I turned on the car, then accidentally turned on the windshield wiper fluid and the wipers on full speed and struggled to turn it off. They laughed it off, but I ended up failing anyway. The worst mistake was an examiner giving me a license. I passed with literally the lowest grade. He said he was legally obligated to pass me, but that I shouldn't drive, and he was right. Toward the end of the semester during driver's ed, we were allowed to take the official driving test with our high school instructor, and generally did so in pairs. I went out for my test along with a classmate. I went first and passed my test just fine. My classmate got in the driver's seat, didn't disengage the parking brake, and backed out of the angled parking space the wrong way. This meant immediate failure, and my instructor literally ripped her paper test form thing in half. Felt bad, but it was pretty hilarious. A buddy of mine was born 6 months before me. When we were 13, he bragged continuously about how much sooner he'd have his license compared to me. Anyway, I think he failed his test like 4 times. First time, he bumped the curb. Second time, I don't know, but he lost his crap at the instructor. It was the same guy testing him. And then made a huge scene, then failed 2 more times after that. By the time he got his license, he was only on the road for 2 weeks before me. I failed my written test once and my mock driving school test, but I passed my first road test. My instructor said, "Well, you did great, but there's a spliff in your cup holder, so I'm going to have to ask you to try again another time." "That's not mine." "Hey, listen, I was young once too. Don't worry, you'll pass next time." My mum left her Mary J. in the car. Not an examiner, but the day I took my test 17 years ago, I was watching the other tests for tips while waiting in line. One kid just finished his test and hit a parked car pulling back into the lot. I overheard the examiner saying that just because he'd already signed the test form, the wreck was on the teenager's license and not himself. As if teenagers' insurance rates aren't already ridiculously high. In driver's ed, I was on my last observation. The guy got in the car and told the instructor he's colorblind. No big deal, wait for it, and that he couldn't rotate his back or turn his head to look for oncoming traffic or pedestrians or people in the other lane. I guess it was genetic because he seemed fine. He had to turn his entire body to see anything. But the driving instructor was cool with it. They had to do all the looking out for the guy. I was scared though. I bet the one with the best answer is no longer here with us. F. The narrator is hitting F and also paying respects. Yes, it has occurred to me that there's definitely a non-zero number of people who've likely died during their tests, which is a sobering thought. Honestly, being an examiner must be a relatively high-stress job now that I think about it. This happened during my test. I just gotten into a little Hyundai as my first car to take my test in, as my mum drove a massive SUV. We hadn't driven it much or anything, but we decided it would suffice. We had to drive about 45 minutes to the testing facility as we lived out in the middle of nowhere. So here I am, 16, nervous as heck, in this new car that we just got, on roads I don't recognize. My instructor had me drive on an old country road where the speed limit was 55 miles per hour, the fastest I'd ever driven. All was going well until I noticed smoke billowing out of my driver wheel well. My car was on fire. Something had bounced up into my tires and burst into flames. After the whole ordeal was over, the instructor passed me despite not completing the maneuverability part of the exam. The cool thing was that the car was totaled due to the fire, and I ended up getting another, way better, non-exploding vehicle. I managed to stall the car on top of a roundabout. Luckily, it wasn't a proper test, but just my dad with a printout of the assessment rubric. It did mark the end of his attempts to teach me how to drive a manual before an automatic. He then did the sensible thing of teaching me the skills required to drive an automatic, then put me back in the manual to learn how to do that without also having to panic about the driving part. I drove across a 6-lane highway because I assumed they all had a stop sign. My examiner nearly crapped his pants. And no, I didn't pass, but I did the next time. My examiner told the story which I haven't forgotten. I'd gotten docked points for not slowing down enough through an uncontrolled intersection. Fair enough. A couple of months prior, a girl had done that and got T-boned by a pickup truck. Yikes. It's funny how those things make an impression on you. My examiner told me my shoulder check when turning right from a stop was barely adequate and that I slowed down too much when about to exit the highway. I thought I was going to fail, but I didn't. And I've made very careful shoulder checks and been aware of traffic behind me when exiting to this day. This is kind of the opposite. Me as the student, but the driving instructor grabbed my wheel on numerous occasions, and on one occasion she grabbed it and was yelling at me to turn into the left lane, which I was doing. However, I was waiting for the driver to get out of my blind spot, and she kept forcing the wheel left as I fought right, and she only let go once the other driver honked at us. Is a driving instructor ever allowed to grab the wheel? I don't understand. The first time I took my test, we started out with maneuvers. For the life of me, probably due to nerves, I couldn't do a reverse bay park right. After about 4 minutes of watching me struggle, the instructor just said, "Let's leave it, huh?" I did the rest of the test anyway for practice, and apparently I would have passed on that, but I failed before I even left the car park of the test center. Oh, mine was a doozy. Got in, put it in reverse, and backed directly into a truck. No damage, still failed though. My ex-girlfriend was taking the test and was asked to demonstrate hand signals. Used left arm to show left turn, right turn, stop. Examiner then asked her to put the window down and demonstrate again without cramming her arm into the window. We have 3 levels of driving tests in my area, 2 tests in vehicle. My first driving test in a vehicle, I saw one person testing being crashed into by another person being tested. For my second in-vehicle test, the person returning when I arrived was followed by a police car. Not an examiner, but my friend once got into an accident during his driver's test. He got confused about a 4-way stop, stopped in the middle of an intersection, then didn't want to get hit by a car coming at him, so he reversed into the car behind him. Whoops! I honestly did pretty well on my whole test and made it all the way back to the DMV. The final test was pulling into a parking spot. The DMV in my city is part of a strip mall with a restaurant directly to the left of the building with outside seating. There were so many open spots and I chose the parking spot right in front of a group of people eating lunch. I rammed right into a guy in his chair that was sitting a couple of inches from the curb. Failed immediately and the examiner lost their crap on me for a solid 5 minutes on my birthday. I waited till the next month to retake the test in the next town over, as it's less busy on the roads and I felt like I couldn't show my face at the first DMV. I walked in, gave my name, and immediately the examiner goes, "Oh my gosh, are you the girl who hit someone in their chair?" I was so embarrassed, but thankfully I still passed. I was the examiner and I was giving this kid his driving test for the second time. We were driving down a 4-lane highway. Now it's my job to make sure he knows how to safely and properly change lanes. When I looked, this kid had plenty of space. I tell him to change lanes. He swerves over without barely a glance, and at this point a car had come flying up out of nowhere. Well, he changes lanes and the car apparently swerves to avoid him. The next thing I see is a car flying through the air across the 4-laner and landing in someone else's yard from behind us. He panicked and I kind of freaked out too. The driver was okay and the person whose yard it was freaked, but it was okay too. By some miracle, that car managed to not hit another car. Needless to say, the kid didn't pass. Again. I think he took the test 2 more times before he finally got it. Scared the crap out of me. There was also a brother and sister who nearly killed me twice in less than 20 minutes. One pulled out in front of a rollback who barely slammed on the brakes in time to not hit us, but I could count the bugs in the grill. The other turned in front of an 18-wheeler. Good times. Good times. This was a high school driving course. Was driving on a back road when my teacher said, "What are you doing?" in the calmest voice. I said, "What do you mean?" Turns out my dumb butt was driving on the wrong side of the road for like a whole minute. Luckily, the road was empty or else that conversation would have ended a lot differently. Funnily enough, I still got my permit at the end of the course. My cousin's girlfriend at the time thought that you could make a left turn on a red if clear. Needless to say, she immediately failed and the guy was so freaked out he drove back to the DMV for her. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.